We'll just start in a couple of minutes, inshallah. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Wa ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can everyone see me? Can everyone hear me? And can everyone see the slides that I'm sharing? Can hear but can't see. Okay. I'm going to have to relog into one of these. I'll be right back. Okay. I cannot see the chat messages from the iftar class. So I will use WhatsApp for that. I don't know why the chat is not there. Okay, people who are signed in, let's see. I hear the presentation, hear you. Okay. It's not important to see me, don't worry about that. As long as you can see the slides, as long as you can hear me, we'll go with that, inshallah. Sheikh Mustafa Omar, you can't hear me? I guess if you can't hear me, you can't respond. Mufti Tasir, can you hear me on WhatsApp? I just want to make sure everyone can hear, and then we'll get started, inshallah. If you can't hear, it may be because you're using an iPhone and not on the right screen. There's a few different screens you have to scroll through to get on your iPhone. But it seems like most people can hear and see, and so we should get started because we have a lot of material to get through, inshallah. Okay. Bismillah. So today we're here to discuss Islamic finance, and that's an extremely important topic because we all want to learn how to earn and consume halal. And in my experience, a lot of our scholars, unfortunately, when they study, they do not spend enough time studying this topic. So what happens is they might take generally a single course on this topic that is focused on finance or focused on fiqh of mu'amalat. Of course, they learn a lot when they go through Darul of Hadith, and they study Hadith, and they study other topics. They also learn financial matters and transactions. The problem that happens is a lot of our scholars, unfortunately, have not studied the modern financial or conventional financial instruments and don't necessarily completely understand how the modern economy works. In addition to that, Islamic finance itself is only about maybe about 40, 50 years old. It started in the 1970s, modern Islamic finance. So classical Islamic finance obviously has always existed, but modern Islamic finance is actually fairly new. And so a lot of people don't understand this well, and that creates issues when people don't know how to answer questions. Okay, so let's get started. Introduction to your instructor. I don't really like talking about myself, but it's important to know who you're getting your knowledge from. And so I put a short bio of myself over here. I memorized the Quran here in California, which is where I'm broadcasting from. I did a Dars al-Nizami style Dawra of Hadith, going through all of the 6 books of Hadith, and I completed my Alim course from As-Salam Institute. In addition to that, I received a master's in conventional finance, like the regular financial degrees that you get from the Wharton School of University of Pennsylvania, and I got a master's in Islamic finance as well. So inshallah, having studied both conventional finance and Islamic finance, I'm hoping that I can share a few things with you as well. Also currently, I am enrolled at Darul in Birmingham, which is sponsoring this class, and I am doing my IFTA course. And subhanAllah, this class was supposed to be on site at Darul in Birmingham right now, but I was not able to make it because of the COVID-19 situation. May Allah protect us all. May Allah help us find a cure to this and help us find a vaccine, and may Allah treat all of those who are ill right now. So originally this was going to be maybe almost a full day class, maybe 6 hours long, and now I have to try and cover it in 3 hours. In fact, now only about 2 hours and 45 minutes left. So in order to get through the material, I have condensed it, I have reduced some of the topics, and I intend to go fast through some of the others. If I go too fast, don't worry too much, a recording will be provided, so inshallah you can go back and listen to the recording. And if that is still not enough, then I have put my contact information up here. Feel free to send me an email anytime if you have any questions, and I can answer them for you, inshallah. I prefer to keep the class interactive. That will be harder to do when it's online and when I've got multiple class sessions going on over here, but we will give that a shot, inshallah. Okay, so in terms of the agenda, this class is named Introduction to Islamic Finance, but also it is catering to many different types of people. So we actually have students who are enrolled in Alim programs who are attending. We have students who are enrolled in Ifta programs to become muftis after the Alim program who are also enrolled in this class. And then we have others who have less background in Islamic studies and less background in some of the conventional finance as well. So because I'm covering a wide range of students, I'm going to do my best to try and cater to all of them so that everyone is hopefully learning something and benefiting from it, and I'm not repeating things that they know already. So I will try, for example, to cover some of the basic concepts of conventional finance and economics, because I think that is an area that many people are weak in and don't understand how it completely relates to Islamic finance. In addition to that, I will also cover things that you learn in Islamic finance courses, but maybe a little bit differently. So first of all, I want to focus heavily on the concept of Ribā and its prohibition. because if we understand riba correctly, then almost everything else becomes a logical derivation or through analogy, something that we can conclude from the basis of what is riba. After that, I will go through Islamic contracts, and this is mostly focused on modern Islamic contracts and the common ones. So we will cover, for example, ijara, musharaka, mudalaba, murabaha. Don't worry if you're not familiar with these terms. We will go through them. You can ignore the Arabic, and if you are familiar, don't worry. I still hope to benefit you from some knowledge. Now, each of these contracts I could spend 3 hours on, or a full day, or maybe even a full semester class, but we're going to try and condense that material and make it somewhat relevant. We won't go into all of the different types of contracts. So we won't go into, for example, there's many types of shirkas, many types of salam, istisna', there's like many different types of contracts. We won't go through all of them, just some of these. Additionally, we will cover real estate financing. So we'll go through the different forms of real estate transactions that we can have. And this hopefully will give us some idea about how to structure other types of business. So if we can figure out, for example, how to buy a house in a halal way, then we can use this knowledge to figure out how to structure, for example, if you want to buy an ice cream shop, or if you want to build a hospital, or if you want to build a very large enterprise and launch rockets. So whatever it is you'd like to do, the idea here is that we're learning the building blocks, and you should be able to apply it to other concepts as well. Similarly, we will talk about stocks, and we will only talk about stocks. We won't get into exchange-traded funds and mutual funds and index funds and 401ks and retirement plans and pension plans and all of these different instruments. But once you learn the basics of how we do stock screening, that concept again can be applied to everything else as well. Now, the topic of finance or Islamic finance specifically can become very long and dry and boring. And I'm going to try and keep it moving along so that that doesn't happen. Some of it can't be helped, but some of the things I will not be covering. So for example, I will not be covering what's termed in fiqh as the fiqh of buyu, or the basic fiqh of, I should say the fiqh of like uqud, like contracts. So what are the conditions that need to be in place, for example, in order to complete a sale, ijab and qabul and how that works, and different khiyarat, what's khiyar al-shart, what's khiyar al-aib, khiyar al-majlis, all of these different things, what renders a contract valid, invalid, existence of things. There's all kinds of details that we can get into, but most of these are things that for the fuqaha and the scholars that are tuned in, for them, they will be reading these in Quduri anyway. So in speaking with Mufti Tawsir, who sponsored the class, he said, don't go through all of the things you will learn in Quduri because everyone already knows that. And for the people who are not fuqaha, then don't worry too much about that anyway. Those are details that generally exist from common customs and norms anyway. When we go and we buy something from a store, we follow all of those norms anyway. Those are not the things that you tuned in to learn about. So I'm hoping to have very little overlap with Quduri. Similarly, I will not talk about zakah. Now, zakah, people tend to think is something that has to do with money. And yes, it has to do with money, but when it comes to the Islamic sciences or Islam itself, zakah is something that we do for ibadah, and it is not something that necessarily comes into the chapter of financial transactions. Now, zakah itself can be its own seminar. We do these seminars regularly anyway, and so I will keep that outside of the scope of the conversation. I will also not talk about gharar and other types of contracts. Gharar is, again, for the scholars, they're aware that gharar generally has to do with a high level of uncertainty in transactions. And so I will not get into, for example, insurance. We just don't have the time to do that. I will also not talk about bonds, credit cards, and many other instruments. But again, when I talk about stocks and real estate, hopefully we can build from there. And also the concept of riba itself. If you don't understand something, please ask right away. If you have any questions at all, please ask, because many of these concepts will build on top of each other. And if you don't understand a basic concept, you will definitely get lost as we move along into the course. Okay? Let's keep moving along. Also, what we will not be covering. So I forgot to mention, we will not be covering personal finance. As in, of course, you will learn how riba applies to your personal financial situation and which Islamic contracts can be used and stocks and things like that. However, what I'm not here to teach you is how to invest. Okay, that's a different class. in how do you build your portfolio, how do you achieve diversification, which stocks should you buy, what type of accounts should you create. So that's not part of today's class. If that's what you were here for, then you will not get that. Maybe you can take the rest of the 2.5 hours off, but that would be a separate seminar, and I intend to do such a seminar if Allah allows later this year, which will just be focused on how should you invest your money, why you should invest your money, and how you should invest it, and obviously in a halal way. Okay, so let's get into the meat of it. Islamic finance itself, obviously, finance has to do with money matters. And Islamic, we all understand what that means. But Islamic finance, a lot of it is really based on this concept of riba. And if we can understand the concept of riba correctly, then the rest of it really falls in place. So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on riba. I'm not going to belabor the details for hours about the prohibition, but I will talk a little bit about the history of riba and why riba is prohibited, so we can understand that, and also talk about, basically, if we understand why, then we can build the rest of it from there. So what is riba? Can people maybe tell me what their definitions are in the chat window? And for the people in the Iftar course, if you can do that in WhatsApp, that would be better, because I can't see the chat window. What do people think riba means? And if you don't know what riba means at all, that's fine too. But what do you think riba means? Riba means, okay, one person says it means interest. Riba is interest, okay. So I have a few people saying riba means interest. Increase, okay. Somebody's saying increase. Somebody said ziyada, which in Arabic means increase. Somebody said profit. Ooh, subhanAllah, okay, interesting. And somebody said exchanging money for money. Okay, nobody said usury. Anyone heard the term usury? Usury. I don't even know how to pronounce it properly. Usury. Okay. So some people are saying exchanging money for money, profit. Riba, yes. So technically, I think many people are correct, because the word riba in Arabic means to increase. Okay. And technically speaking, riba means an increase in money that you may have, the money that someone owes you. Okay, we'll talk more about it in detail. I just wanted to kind of hear your thoughts about it, but we'll talk more about what riba exactly means in more detail. Okay, is it usury or is it interest? Okay, so a lot of people translate it as interest. A lot of people translate it as usury. Some people say it means making money on money. Now, something that I've noticed is that Muslims tend to have almost like an inferiority complex, where they're embarrassed sometimes because they see Islam as something that's prohibiting interest, but they don't see the other religions do that, or they don't see other people do that. And the other people don't seem to understand, or even the Muslims don't understand. Why did Allah prevent this? Why did Allah prohibit this in the first place? And if we don't understand why it's prohibited, that creates a problem. Number one, we can make a mistake and accidentally get into riba without knowing it. Number two, it doesn't help us. Islam is a religion where everything that Allah has allowed us to do or prevented us to do, He's done for a reason. And so understanding the reason gives us some comfort to the mind and some comfort to the heart as we engage in our daily dealings. Okay, so of course we should never be embarrassed about anything in Islam anyway, but just to help us understand how is riba viewed outside of Islam, I've got a little bit of data to share with you about that. So let's talk about riba and a historical view of riba. Okay, so a lot of people, they believe that the different religions didn't ban riba, or they don't know that the religions have banned riba. They only think Islam did it, and not the other religions. Or they think that the other religions banned riba, but they only banned it maybe if it was excessive. So they will say, interest is like a low amount of riba, or a low amount of return, and usury is a high amount of return, and usury is what's prohibited, not interest. So what's the difference anyway? Anyone have a difference between, anyone know the difference between interest and usury? Why are there two terms in English? Interest and usury. Okay. Sheikh Mustafa Umer says that the reason we have two terms, interest and usury, is so that one can be declared halal. So we can say, you know what, interest is okay. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and usury is the bad one. So let's not engage in that. You know what? He's absolutely correct. He's done his research on this matter. So we'll talk more about that, inshallah. But for now, let's just understand that we're talking about the term riba, okay? And we don't really know if it's interest or usury. We're just going to go through history. So let's start with historical societies, the ancient societies. Back even as early as 5000 BC, if not earlier, we saw that the Mesopotamians, the Hittites, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, they were all dealing with riba when it came to food money. So they would lend someone, for example, olives or dates or seeds or animals, and when then they would get it back, they said, give it with an increase. And when they did this, the other people looked at it with disdain. They said, this is something really bad, this is something really wrong to do. But this was happening as far back as 5000 BC, and people were saying this is really wrong. So everybody knew this was something wrong to do. At least this is one of the earliest accounts that we know of, is 5000 BCE. And then if we look at the Hindus, so if we look at their scriptures, their manuscripts in India from 2000 BC to 1400 BC, we find that, again, riba was something that was looked at with disdain. It was something that was highly discouraged and frowned upon. And it was considered any amount that somebody loaned out, and then they got a return for it, okay? So it didn't matter what percentage it was. Anytime someone loaned money and got a return on it, this was frowned upon. The Buddhists, this is documented in the Jatakas in 600 to 400 BC. Again, they also had great disdain for payment or taking of interest. In all of these cases, the Hindus, the Greeks, the Buddhists, all of them saw it, not the Greeks yet, but the Mesopotamians, the Phoenicians, Egyptians, all of these saw it as something that was really bad, and it's taking basically an interest on something that you've loaned out, okay? So moving on to the Greeks. Now, the Greeks, I think everyone's heard of maybe Plato and Aristotle, and a group of scholars, philosophers known as the scholastics. So all of these philosophers, they weren't very religious, but still they considered usury or interest to be something really bad, and they criticized it. Now, they weren't thinking about it from a religious standpoint. They were thinking about it purely from a philosophical, intellectual, using their mind standpoint. So Aristotle and the scholastics said that usury or riba is considered an unjust claim because you're not really doing any work for it. You're just giving someone money, and then when they give it back to you, you're asking for extra money. So this isn't just. And they said that money by its nature is sterile, and a temporary loss in being separated from money should not result in you asking someone for an increase. So just because you let go of your money for a short period of time for someone else to use it doesn't mean that you should demand something in return for it. Now, moving on to the Romans. So Cato, Cicero, Seneca, Plutarch, all of them criticized riba. In fact, Cato was asked, we say in our study, he was asked, what do you think of lending at usury? What do you think of lending with riba? And he said, what do you think about murder? So in his mind, he thought riba was something as bad as committing murder. That's how evil and unjust it was. And in fact, interest, riba, usury, all of this was completely banned in the Roman Republic for a long, long time, right? 340 BC, we have some accounts of that. It was banned for a very long time in any amount, even if you said, I want to charge a 1% return on that. However, towards the decline of the Roman Empire, towards the end of the Roman Empire, that's when they started dealing with riba. So Julius Caesar, at that time, set a maximum on riba, and he said, the maximum amount you can earn is 12%. And after him, Justinian, he set it at 4.8%. So even back then, when they allowed riba, they regulated it because they knew that this was a problem. So moving on to Judaism. It's known as ribit in Hebrew, which is the same word as riba. And from the Torah as we have it today, or whatever form we have it today, we can see in the book of Deuteronomy that it says, thou shalt not lend upon interest to thy brother. Interest of money, interest of victuals, interest of anything that is lent upon interest. Unto a foreigner thou mayst lend upon interest. So basically the Jews did not allow interest or riba amongst themselves. However, they allowed it amongst foreigners. What does foreigner mean here? It means a non-Jew. So they were allowed to lend to non-Jews with interest. And the same message is repeated many, many times in the Bible, in Exodus and Leviticus and Proverbs and so on. And some people later came along, the reformist Jews, they came along and they argued and said, no, the prohibition of riba or ribbit is only to ban interest on the poor or the sick. But you can take it from other people, that's not a problem. However, the verse in Deuteronomy is actually very, very clear. It says nothing about the poor or the needy, it bans it outright. It's, as we would say, in fiqh we would say it's qat'i, right? It's just absolute clear evidence that they could not deal with riba except with foreigners. And later on, they also had to come up with an explanation because it looked bad. Hey, how come you can charge interest to non-Jews? Why can you not charge interest to yourselves, but you can charge interest to non-Jews? So they came up with this explanation. They said that, foreigners, they can be understood as someone who's your enemy, and maybe you're at war with them. And so usury is a weapon that we use as a way to diminish their wealth. So it was a means that they were using to actually destroy their enemies. That was the purpose at that time. Even then, even the Jews understood that this is something that destroys wealth, and it's something that should only be used against your enemies. Okay, Christianity. So the Catholic rate also the Catholic Church prevented interest or usury at any rate. In fact, in the Council of Nicaea, which is where they declared the divinity of Jesus and declared him God, astaghfirullah, and they declared the Trinity to be true. They actually, at that time, also made it very, very clear, because they found that some of the clergy in Christianity were taking riba, and so they made it very, very clear that nobody is to take riba. And so I don't want to spend too much time on this. In the Middle Ages, anyone in like the 1179, anyone who took interest, they were excommunicated. So they were kicked out and expelled. And in fact, if they died, they would not get a Christian burial, and they would not be buried in a Christian graveyard. That's how sinful it was to deal with riba. And in fact, the Jews were kicked out of England. They were expelled in 1290 by the Christians, because the Jews at that time were dealing with riba. As we said, the Jews, they can deal with riba with foreigners, right? So they were charging the interests, riba, and because of that, they were expelled. And there's a lot of literature written about this. Dante in the Divine Comedy talks about the levels of hell and who's going to go to which level of hell. And he mentions that the people who take riba are going to go to the 7th level of hell, which is the highest level. And Shakespeare has a whole play about this, right? Merchant of Venice. He talks about the Jewish Shylock who takes interest, in the whole story is about this and how bad riba is. And Thomas Aquinas, who was a rational thinker, he came up and from his thoughts and his argumentation, he said, money is something that if you loan it to someone and you charge interest, it's like double charging. It's like you sell someone a bottle of wine and then you charge them to drink it. It doesn't make sense. Money is not something that can be sold like that, and you shouldn't do that. Pope Benedict the 14th, in 1745, he condemned interest, and he made it very, very clear, because some people were dealing with interest. He said that one cannot condone the sin of usury by arguing that the gain is not great or excessive. So even in small amounts, he said, even in moderate or small amounts, this is a sin. He made it very, very clear. He also said that you cannot accept it even if the borrower is rich. It's still absolutely wrong. And he said, even if you argue that the money is just sitting there, might as well lend it out, that still doesn't make it correct. So this is what was going on in Christianity. However, even in Christianity, at one point, the Vatican, the church, they needed some money, and so they didn't know what to do. How do they get a loan? So they went to the Medici Bank and they said, hey, we'd like to get a loan. The Medici Bank said, well, we charge interest on our loans. So the Christian church had to figure out, how do we deal with this issue? So what they did was they actually came up with 2 different transactions. They said, you know what? We buy some of these commodities. We buy some silks and brocades and jewels and other things from the bank anyway. So what we'll do is the bank will do an interest-free loan to the church, and the church will pay more profit on the silk and the jewels and other things in return for that. So they separated it into two transactions, basically finding a loophole or a workaround. So they were cheating, right? They were trying to cheat Allah by separating it into two transactions, but in the end, they were just trying to make Riba work. So anyway, they all knew how bad Riba was, and in fact, when the church was doing this, Martin Luther, he condemned this, and he said, this is damned and accursed, and it's called a zinskaf, like in Islam we use the term hila. It's a trick. They're trying to find a loophole or a workaround to make it work. Moving into the modern period, so the 1500s, people started to raise more and more arguments for interest. They said, hey, we really want to deal with interest. It can be, because if we're giving someone money, we can't use that money. We can't make other money from it. So maybe there's a reason that we should take interest for it. However, it continued to be banned by the Catholic Church. At any rate, in 1545, Henry VIII, he decided multiple things. He formed the Church of England, and he also wanted to make, he wanted to marry another woman, so he wanted to divorce his first wife, and so he wanted to make divorce halal in Christianity, so he made that happen. In addition to that, he also made riba halal in Christianity, and the way that he achieved that was he came up with two terms. He said, there's interest, which is just a normal amount of return, and that's acceptable. And then there's usury, which is when you're exploiting someone or taking advantage of them by taking a very high rate of return. And that's how in 1545, this term interest versus usury came about. And this is where people start going, oh, okay, that usury has always been haram. No. Interest and usury have both always been haram. In 1545, they decided to separate that into two different terms. Now, and then in 1787, this was picked up by Adam Smith, who was one of the founders of modern economics, and that's how Riba became big in our modern economic system. And in 1917, finally, only 103 years ago, did the church finally say, you know what, we will allow money to accrue interest. So only 100 years ago did they decide that interest is okay, because their religion, of course, keeps changing. Now, believe it or not, these laws against usury still exist in our country. So for example, in Canada, it is against the law to charge 60% interest. That is their limit. If you charge 60% or more, that becomes impermissible by law. But if you charge less than 60%, that's acceptable. Even California has a law, where I live, that 7 to 10% is the highest they can charge for interest, okay? 7 to 10%. Now, those of us that live in California, if you've ever looked at a credit card contract, the credit card contract doesn't say 7 to 10%. It says more like 16% or 18% or 20%. So how does that work? How do credit cards charge 16% or 20% or 24% when the law says you can only charge 7 to 10%? The reason that is the law applies to every state has its own law. Okay, that's how it works in the United States. The states have their own law, and every state is free to set their own usury rate. And the states of Nevada, the state of Delaware, and the state of South Dakota have decided that they're going to have no maximum usury rate. So what this has achieved for the state of Delaware and South Dakota is that all of the credit card companies are now over there. Okay, so if you ever get a credit card bill, instead of getting it online, if you get a letter, you will notice it will always say Delaware or it will say South Dakota. Because by incorporating over there, by forming the company over there, they can charge everyone in America that 16, 18, 20, 24%. So that's how that works. Okay, so let's get to, now that we've learned that riba has existed as a concept in all of these different societies throughout time, in all of these different religions. It was something that was looked down upon. It was something that was understood as bad. It was something that was known as being wrong from a religious standpoint, as well as an intellectual standpoint. Let's talk about riba in Islam, and I'm going to go through this material rather quickly, okay? Because I think the verses are fairly evident. So in Islam, one of the first verses that was revealed was in Surah Al-Imran, verse 130, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la ta'kulu riba. Okay? And the context of this was that this verse was revealed around the time of Uhud in the third year of the Hijrah. And this is the first verse that we know of that was explicitly prohibiting riba. And some scholars believe that this happened because at the time of Uhud, the Quraysh were financing their weaponry and their provisions that needed for war through Ribā, and this was a reminder for the Muslims that they should not do the same. Okay. Sorry, I'm just paying attention to all the different chats as well. And then Ribā, most scholars believe, was something similar. Its prohibition came similar to alcohol, where initially it was disliked and its prohibition was not so emphasized, and then over time it became more and more clear, and the prohibition was made absolute and clear. Now, those who've memorized the Quran, who are familiar with this verse, this is not the entire verse. This is a portion of it. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la ta'kulu riba, O you who believe, do not consume riba. How does this verse end? I think many of you know how this verse ends. What follows this? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la ta'kulu riba ad'afan mudha'afa. Okay. So the verse is saying, O you who believe, do not consume riba ad'afan mudha'afa. What does ad'afan mudha'afa mean? A lot of people have, and a lot of the mufassirun have interpreted this or translated it as something that's like doubling, or doubling and doubling, or becoming extremely large, like ridiculous amounts of riba. Where, for example, let's say someone owes you $100, and then you say, I will charge you $10 interest on it, and they don't pay you back on time. You say, I'm going to charge you $100 interest on it, and double it. However, in the research that I've done, I do not believe that is the best interpretation of ad'af mudha'afa. First of all, linguistically, it doesn't exactly mean that. Linguistically, it means more multiplied and remultiplied. And if you look at sort of how the loans were done at that time, yes, certainly there were loans that were done where people were doubling, tripling, whatever, and charging ridiculous amounts. But the best translation or the best interpretation, wallahu a'lam, that I came up with for this is that this is compound interest. So for those who've worked with compound interest or understand how compound interest works, is basically you earn your interest and then you earn it again at the next time period. So for example, instead of earning, let's say you say, interest is going to be 12% over the year, and you give someone $100, and at the end of the year, they pay you back $112, right? So the interest rate would be 12%. Instead of doing that, you say, no. Instead of doing that, we're going to do 1% every month, okay? So instead of 12% at the end of the year, I'll charge you 1%. So it becomes like $101 after the first month. After the second month, it's not $102. It's $101 times 1%, okay? And then the third month, it's 100 and whatever that dollars was. So it ends up being, I don't know the exact amount, but it ends up being more than $112. It ends up being like, maybe 113, 114. I don't know what the number is. Maybe one of you can do the math. But it ends up being a lot more when you compound it. And that is a common type of interest that we deal with today, but you can compound very, very quickly, and the amount just keeps adding up and adding up. So the rest of the verse says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, and be conscious of Allah so that you may be successful. Okay, so that was the first verse of in the Quran that we know about Ribā. The second verse that we're aware of is part of a larger verse where Allah is talking about the Jews, and this is in Surah Al-Ma'idah. And so in this, Allah is referring to the Jews, and He says, وَأَخْذِهِمُ الرِّبَا وَقَدِمُهُ عَنْهُ. That the Jews, Allah is speaking, basically saying like how the Jews were not doing the right thing. And He says, because of their charging riba, while they were knowing that they were prohibited from it. So it wasn't that they were charging riba out of ignorance. They knew it was wrong, yet they were charging riba. Now, this verse was most likely revealed in the mid-Medinan period, where the Muslims were interacting with the Jews. And the verse is beneficial in a few different ways. Number one, the Muslims would not be criticizing, or the Quran would not be criticizing the Jews if the Jews were not practicing it, right? And it also makes it clear for us that this riba that the Jews were practicing is the same riba that we're prohibited from, because the word that's used is the same, riba. Okay, so the next set of verses that talk about riba, and this is a long set in Surah Baqarah, towards the end of Surah Baqarah, they say, الذين يأكلون الربا لا يقومون إلا كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس that anyone who takes riba or interest, it doesn't say interest, I don't know why the translation says interest, it should say riba. Anyone who takes interest will not stand on the day of judgment except as the one who stands like the one that Shaitan has driven crazy. And that is because ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا. That's because they say that trading is just like riba. So they say, you know what? Profit, interest, what's the difference? It's all the same. وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا. But Allah has permitted trading and Allah has prohibited riba. So these verses came after the conquest of Mecca, and they made clearly all riba completely void and impermissible, right? So this first part we can see, Allah says they say that trade and riba, or like buying and selling and riba, it seems the same. وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا. So Allah is addressing them. Allah responds directly, but there's a big difference. Allah has made trading halal and He has made riba haram. And we'll talk about more. We'll talk more about why in a little bit, inshallah. Okay, the verses continue. فَمَنْ جَاءَهُ مَوْعِظَةٌ مِّن رَبِّهِ فَانْتَهَى فَلَهُ مَا سَلَفَ وَأَمْرُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَمَنْ عَادَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. Okay, so whoever receives an advice from his Lord and stops. So whoever takes this advice to stop riba, and he allows he is allowed what has passed. So whatever riba you dealt with in the past, at this point, when this verse was revealed, Allah is saying it's done. So if you've already conducted a loan-based transaction, an interest-based transaction in the past, and now the verse is revealed, at this point, that transaction was over, so it's done. Don't worry about that. But if you return to dealing with riba-based transactions, then for you is the fire of hell, and you will remain in it forever. Sheikh Nabil Khan is asking if the prohibition of riba in the Quran by the Jews is referring to their description only being impermissible amongst themselves, or the Islamic view, which is general. Wallahu a'lam, but my view on this, at least from my limited research, is that this is a general prohibition. Of course, we know that the Torah that we have now is not the original Torah that was revealed to them. Our perspective is that riba was always 100% impermissible for them, whether amongst themselves or with non-Jews. So the Quran is prohibiting all of that. Okay, the verses continue. يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَا وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. Allah says He destroys interest, وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ, and He increases the charities. Now, interestingly enough, the word Allah used is yurbi. Yurbi. So yurbi is derived from the same word, riba. So what Allah is saying, it's a play on words. He's saying that He destroys all of interest and He does riba to the charity, meaning that He's using it in His linguistic term here, that He increases charity. So when you give money to charities, there's barakah in that. And when you deal with riba, there is no barakah in your wealth. وَاللَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ كُلَّ كَفَّارٍ أَثِيمٍ. And Allah does not like every sinning disbeliever. And then it continues, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَذَرُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَا إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. O you who believe, fear Allah and give up what still remains of the interest if you are believers. So again, this is addressing the believers at the time when this verse was revealed, and Allah says, give up وَذَرُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَا, anything that remains from the interest. So if you have given a loan to someone and they owe you interest, waive their interest at this point. Waive it. Do not ask for it back. You are no longer allowed to do that. In kuntum mu'minin, if you're believers, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. And if you do not do this, then listen to a declaration of war from Allah and His Messenger. Nowhere else in the Quran does Allah talk about declaring war upon someone. So this is a really, really big deal and something that we should be very scared of, is that Allah and His Messenger are declaring war upon someone who continues to deal with interest. وَإِن تُبْتُمْ فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ. And this was basically the finality of the verses. And Allah says, and if you repent, meaning if you give up the interest, yours is your principal. رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ, that the amount that you had lent. So let's say I loaned someone $100 and they owed me $105 because of interest. I forgive the 5 and I keep the 100. Okay. And then neither you wrong, so you will not do wrong, and you will not be wrong. Okay, so those are the verses. Okay, moving on. Okay, ahadith about riba. So I'm not going to go into great detail I'm just going to cover it at a high level. There's a hadith in Bukhari about the 7 great destructive sins. One of the sins is doing shirk with Allah, so associating someone in Allah, and along with that, other sins. And then one of them that's mentioned is to consume riba. So it's a big deal. Another sin where another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ talked about a dream that he had, and in that dream he saw a river of blood, and he saw a man inside that river, and he saw another man who was standing at the bank of the river, and again, this is blood we're talking about, right? So one man is inside it, and one man standing on the bank. And every time the one that's inside tries to come up, the one who's standing on the back would take a stone, and he would throw a stone in the mouth of the person who was inside that blood. And then he would kind of fall back, and then he would try and come up again, and then again he would throw a stone in his mouth. And the Prophet ﷺ asked the angels about it. He said, who is this? Who is this man that is having to deal with the suffering in the river of blood? And he was told that the person in the river of blood was a consumer of interest, someone who was dealing with interest. Pretty scary. Okay, Ibn Mas'ud in a hadith said, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam cursed the one who consumed interest, the one who commissioned it, the one who witnessed it, and the one who recorded it. So, one second. Okay, so it isn't just the person who's taking the riba. Let me see if I can just fix one of the issues here. Okay, got it. Okay, let's resume. Sorry about that. Okay, so the prohibition isn't just a sin to take interest. It is the same. It is considered the same if you are giving interest, or if you're just witnessing it, or if you're just writing it down, knowing that it's going on. That is extremely evil. This shows how evil it is. Now, all of what we've talked about so far is called Ribā an-Nasi'a. This is when you give someone a loan and then you ask for an increase back. This is also known as Ribā al-Qur'an, and this is also known as Ribā al-Jahiliyyah, and sometimes people call it Ribā al-Akbar, the bigger riba. There's also another riba that's called Ribā al-Fadl, which is talked about in the hadith. And I'm not going to get into too much detail on this because I don't think we need to, okay? So one time, Bilal, radiallahu anhu, he brought some dates to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ asked about the dates. And I won't go into all the details, but basically what Bilal had done was he had some low-quality dates. He had 2 measures of low-quality dates, and he went and he traded them with someone who had 1 measure of high-quality dates. And the Prophet ﷺ said about this transaction, he said, beware, this is definitely riba, this is definitely riba. Don't do that. Next time, if you want to trade high-quality dates for low-quality dates, then first complete the transaction of you selling the low-quality dates, and then separately buy the high-quality dates. And this is called Ribā al-Fadl, when you exchange 2 types of commodities like this. Let me cover one more hadith and then I'll explain. So the hadith that's very well known amongst the scholars is a hadith that says that you cannot trade gold for gold, silver for silver, dates for dates, wheat for wheat, salt for salt, and barley for barley, right? So this is one of the well-known hadith that do not trade these 2 commodities by trading a low-quality one with a high-quality one, or trading one right now and one in the future. Okay, so what does this have to do with interest? What does it have to do with riba? Let me explain. Okay, so these 6 commodities: gold, silver, dates, wheat, salt, and barley. What the Prophet ﷺ is trying to explain is that there's an opportunity here for either unfairness or for exploitation. Okay, so what could happen is maybe you're trying to trade something low quality and high quality, but in your head you didn't calculate it too well. You didn't measure it properly. You didn't think about what the value of each of them is, and now you trade them and you end up being exploited, or you end up exploiting someone, whether you do it intentionally or unintentionally. Okay, so this is Ribā al-Fadl or Ribā al-Hadith. We're not going to get into too much detail about that. However, there's been discussion about this, and different fuqaha, different scholars, different madahib take this hadith in different ways. And so for some of them, they look at the weight and they say, you know what, anything that can be weighed falls into the same category. It doesn't matter if it's one of these things or not, if it's gold or silver or barley or wheat or dates or not. Others say, no, it's anything that you can measure the volume. Others say it's anything that's a medium of exchange. Others say it's anything that's edible gets added to this category. Anyone says, some other people say these are all preservable things, so anything that's not preservable. So different scholars have had different interpretation of this hadith. Hanafis, they say anything that can be weighed or has volume, that is what we consider under this category. And the reason for prohibition, again, the scholars have discussed, is it really itself haram, or is it because it leads to haram? Like saddi zarai, right? Something that leads to haram. Sometimes something is prohibited because it leads to haram. Like, for example, we know that zina or adultery is haram, but a man and a woman being in khalwa, being alone together, is also haram. And the reason for the prohibition is because it could lead to zina, right? So the question is this type of riba only haram because it can lead to something haram, or is it haram because of itself? And the reason, it doesn't really matter, we don't need to answer that question. The reason the scholars have sometimes discussed this issue is because some of the modern scholars have used that as a means to say, you know what, it's actually like not really haram. So because of need and because of benefits for the society and the community, let's make it halal because its level of prohibition isn't as high. So that's a very modern concept, and mostly predominant in the Arab world and not so much in the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, and so on. Okay, anyway, let's move on. So what is the definition of riba? The Quran itself actually did not define riba at all. Just like it did not define gambling, it did not define adultery, it did not define alcohol or pork. It didn't have to define these things. People just knew what it was. Other societies practiced it. The Jews were doing it. So everybody kind of knew what riba was. The Quraysh were doing it at their time as well. And so the basic common feature that we see across riba transactions is an increased amount charged on a principal of debt. This term principal, if you don't know, is the amount that you've loaned out. So again, if I loan someone $100, that is considered the principal. And if I charge 5% interest every year, that means that they return it back to me at the end of the year as $105, $100 being principal and 5% being the interest or the riba or the usury. Okay, now this is where it's important to understand. This is important to understand. If you do not understand this, please ask questions. Not all interest is riba. Okay? I'll repeat, not all interest is riba. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, let's say I want to sell you my iPhone, okay? And we decide that I will sell this to you, it's iPhone 11 Pro Max, right? So I decide I will sell it to you for $1,000, and we agree, we believe that is a fair price, okay? We both know that I purchased it, let's say, for $1,200, okay? And now I'm selling it for $1,000. So I'm actually losing a little bit of money because I used it, right? And I'm selling it to you for $1,000. Again, I'm selling it to you for $1,000. Actually, let's make the example easier, okay? Let's say I bought this iPhone on a really good deal at $500, okay? And I'm selling it to you for $1,000, which, by the way, is still a good deal. It's an iPhone Pro 11 Pro Max, okay? So it's still a good deal. So I bought it for $500. I'm selling it to you for $1,000, okay? How much profit do I make in that transaction? Really quick. I bought it for $1,000. I bought it for $500. I'm selling it for $1,000. How much profit am I making in that transaction? $500. Okay, everybody got it. $500. Now, what if you say, you know what? I don't have $1,000 to give you right now. Can I pay you back after a year? Because I will have the money, you know, I have some investments, or I have some earnings that I've done, and somebody owes me, and it'll come back in a year. Can I pay you back in 1 year? Islamically, I can say yes. I can say yes. However, Islamically, I can also say, but you know what? Because it's going to take that long for you to get me the money, instead of $1,000, why don't you give me 1,050? So give me the money at the end of 2020, but instead of 1,000, give me 1,050. Is that halal? If I sell you my iPhone and I was going to sell it to you for 1,000, but now that you want to pay at the end of the year, I say, give me 1,050. Is that halal? Okay, so I'm seeing all of the shuyukh, the scholars, the ulama, the fuqaha, they're all responding and saying yes. And I'm seeing for other people, they are saying yes, no. Yes, no, 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 yes. Okay, let me make this clear, okay? So if I am directly selling you a product, a good, and I say, if you pay me in a year, I'm going to charge you an extra $50, Islamically, that is allowed, okay? That is absolutely allowed. We're going to discuss this type of sale as murabaha. We'll talk about it later, okay? But it is allowed. It's not considered as making money on money because I didn't loan you money. I'm selling you my iPhone and I'm charging you extra because I don't get to use my iPhone for that 1 year, okay? Islamically, that's allowed. We'll talk more about that inshallah as well, okay? Now, let me ask you another question, and this question is especially for the fuqaha, the ulama, but everyone else as well. I bought this phone for 500. I sold it to you now for 1,050, right? What amount is the profit in conventional financial terms? What is the profit? Bought for 500, selling for 1,050. Some people say 550. People are saying 550. Okay, most people are saying $550. Okay. Let me rattle your world a little bit, okay? Conventionally, that's not how we speak. We say, I bought it for $500. I'm selling it to you for $500 profit, and I'm charging you $50 interest because you're going to pay me after 1 year. Okay? That's how we speak about it. Now, I'm sure some people are not liking what I'm saying, but isn't interest haram in Islam? Look, I'm not saying this is riba, okay? Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is riba. I'm just saying if you went out and conducted this transaction and you went out on, I don't know what you have in England. In the US, we buy stuff from like OfferUp, Craigslist, eBay, Amazon, anywhere. You buy it from somebody. And you buy it for 1,000. They say, no, you're going to pay me in a year. I'm going to charge you $50. That's called interest, okay? Per Islam, that's not riba. However, we call it interest. Someone's asking, is that a usage fee? No, it's not a usage fee. It's not a usage fee. It is a fee that I am charged. It's part of the price, right? Because profit's part of the price. Interest is part of the price as well. It's part of the price, but I'm charging it because I don't get, for whatever reason, I don't get to use the phone. I could have sold it to someone else for 1,000 right now and then invested that money, right? So anyway, this is called interest, but this type of interest is not riba. It is not prohibited by Islam, okay? Another type might be, for example, if anyone has leased a car, you know that on the car they have interest charges. They'll say you're taking this Honda Accord, okay, and you're going to get a 3-year lease, and every month you're going to pay $300. First of all, that's not a good deal. You should negotiate it better than $300, but it's $300, and then they say, of that $300, let's say $40 is interest charges. Okay, so you're leasing a car. This is not lease to own. You're renting a car from Honda Motors, $300 a month. And part of that $300, it says $40 are interest charges. Is that haram? Is that riba? It's riba. It's okay. The answer is no. No, it is not haram. It is not riba. Okay. If you are renting a car and you're not buying it, you're just renting it, and you're paying $300 a month, and after 3 years you give the car back, what are you paying? You're just paying a rent. Okay, we have to look at things from our perspective. We have to look at it from our perspective, not the language of conventional finance. We have to look at it from the Islamic perspective. If someone is renting you something and they're charging you $300 a month, okay, if they're calculating it by taking LIBOR interest rate, and then they're doing some calculation to amortize the total amount, and then they have an initial asset charge, and they amortize it and depreciate it, and then they bundle all of that into amortization costs and interest costs, and they call it interest. They can call it whatever they want. From your perspective, you're renting something for $300 a month for 3 years, okay? I'm not saying this is a trick. This is not a trick. This is just what it is. They're looking at it that way because they're people of finance, okay? And people of finance have a certain vocabulary and language and a way of doing things. So in finance, we have, time value of money. We'll talk about that. There's a certain vocabulary. So just because they call it interest doesn't make it interest. Doesn't make it riba, okay? And just because they don't call it interest doesn't mean that it's not riba. The question that one of the scholars is asking is, isn't the wording binding so that the words will take those effect? So the question is, if the contract says it's interest, just the fact that it says it's interest, doesn't that make it a problem? The answer is no, because contracts are al-umuru bi maqasidiha. We'll talk about that. Okay, so what doesn't matter is the actual words used. What matters is their impact. Okay, and we'll talk a bit more about this. Okay, also, and I hinted to this, not all riba is interest. As we talked about earlier, we said, trading certain types of gold for gold, dates for dates, etc. That is not necessarily interest. Okay? Any questions right now? Because if you're confused, then we're going to struggle for the rest of the class. Is it clear that, finance people? Okay, please go ahead and ask questions. I think most people are clear. Basically, what I'm saying is, can you sell your old gold and get the money and buy new gold? Yes, you can sell your old gold. If you sell your gold with money, for money, immediately, hand to hand, and then you go and buy new gold hand to hand. Yes, you can do that. Okay, alhamdulillah, so most of the people said they are following. And Sheikh Kamran said, please explain, not all riba is interest. Okay, basically, Sheikh Naeem and Sheikh Bilal, the quick answer to not all riba is interest is look at at-tamru bit-tamr, right? Gold for gold, dates for dates, wheat for wheat. Where's the interest in that? When I say interest, think about it from the modern financial standpoint, right? This is what people refer to as interest. If I go in front of a finance person and I say, I took these old dates or these dry dates and I traded them for these wet dates, is that an interest-based transaction? They would look at me funny and say, that's just a trade. What does that have to do with interest? There's no interest there. Okay, moving on. This is an important concept. By the way, break will be in about 20 minutes, okay? We'll have an Asr break for UK in about 20 minutes, inshallah. So I want to try and get through some of these things very quickly. Okay, so understanding why riba is prohibited is very important, okay? Now, the simple answer of why is riba prohibited, why do you not deal with riba? Allah said so, His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said so, right? That's enough for us, right? We don't need more than that. However, if we don't really understand why riba is prohibited, then we miss the point behind why it's prohibited. Then we start coming up with hilas. Remember the church when they needed to borrow money from Medici Bank for interest, and they said, you know what, give us an interest-free loan and we'll give you extra profit the jewelry and the other things that we're buying from you, right? We start coming up with these tricks, or we start coming up with mechanisms that might be riba without us realizing it's riba, okay? And this is where the important principle to understand, one of the fiqh principles or maxims that we have is al-umuru bi-maqasidiha, that matters are by their objectives or intentions. So if a contract says interest, that's not a problem, as long as it's not really interest for us, okay? As long as it's really not riba for us. So why is riba prohibited? Let's start with some basic concepts, okay? Riba is prohibited because it causes injustice, oppression, unfairness, misaligned interests, okay? I'm going to go through a few different reasons why it's prohibited, okay? The first one, for example, is how behavioral economics works. This is something that Ibn Rushd studied. This is something that modern economists study. This is something that is actually well known in modern psychological and economic theory, is how individuals handle discounting, okay? And what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is humans, for example, will prefer a small, immediate reward over a larger, delayed reward, okay? This is like the bird in the hand versus bird in the bush concept, right? That's the saying in English, right? The idea is, for example, for many people, if I said, I can give you $5 now or $10 2 weeks from now, okay? Unfortunately, many people will take the $5 now, even though the $10 2 weeks from now is a much better deal, right? If I'm giving you a gift, pure gift, okay, so there's no riba, nothing, just gift. Let's say $5 now and $10 2 weeks from now. If you say, I want the $5 now, rationally thinking, intellectually thinking, either it's because somehow you know me and you have a bad impression of me. You're saying, you know what? I know Umer. He's not good with his word. So 2 weeks from now, I don't think he's going to give me $10. Let me just take the $5 now. Let me take what I can get now, right? So maybe that's what's going on, and inshallah, that's not true. Or you are not thinking about this correctly. You're like, you know, $5 now, that sounds good. Let me just take that now. So there's this irrational human behavior. And by the way, I'm talking about $5 and $10. Let's make this 5 million versus 10 million, right? It's the same concept. Something that applies in large quantities also applies in small quantities, right? So if I say take $5 million now or $10 million in 2 weeks, you should wait for the 2 weeks. Unfortunately, humans are not very good at this concept and they calculate incorrectly. So sometimes we use our gut to figure out if we should take that amount now or take an amount in the future, and we calculate it incorrectly. If you were to go back to a spreadsheet in a financial tool and calculate it, you would figure out you made the wrong decision. So this is something that, this is probably also the reason for the prohibition of riba al-fadl, because we don't necessarily do this math very well in our head. It's not because we're not good at math, because our psychology leads us to the wrong conclusion, okay? Before I get into other reasons, I want to talk about loans versus investment for a little bit, okay? So let's say, okay, looks like most people want to take the $10, which is good. Okay, somebody's asking about car rent, same with the house rent. Yes, house rent would work the same as car. There's no difference between a car and a house, really, when it comes to transactions. Okay, so loans versus investments. This part's important to understand. So Islamically speaking, and sorry, I just picked random avatars from the internet, so I have this Saudi guy. I don't mean to imply that Saudis are benevolent and others are not, or that they're bad and others are not. This is just showing a human being, okay? So it's a person who has $100, okay? And there's another person who is in need, okay? So this is a lady here, let's call her Aisha. So maybe Aisha is a poor person that needs food, or maybe she's a poor person that needs medicine. Maybe she's a student and she wants to go and study her undergraduate in engineering so she can have a good job. And she needs a car to go back and forth from, or maybe it's a person who needs a car to go to her job. Whatever the reason might be, it's a person who is in need. Now, I did not say this is always a poor person, okay? I did not say this is always someone who doesn't have money. It could be a millionaire who's in need. How can a millionaire be in need? Okay, let's say me and my millionaire friend were standing in line for food and he forgot his wallet, right? And he's really hungry. So he's in need, right? Because he doesn't have money and he wants to get some food but he's really rich. He's still in need. So if I gave him money as a loan, that's still giving it to someone with a need. Okay, so it doesn't have to be someone poor. It could just be anyone who needs money. Now, this concept in Islam of how a loan works is this man here we see giving Aisha $100, and then Aisha is able to fulfill her need. Let's say she buys the car to go to her job, or is able to pay her tuition to go to college, and then later she gets money, and then she pays that $100 back. Okay, so this is how a loan works Islamically, and it is considered checkbox green halal. Okay, so you're helping someone, only expecting a reward from Allah with no worldly gain. Every loan in Islam is a qard hasana. You don't charge anything additional on it, and it is a noble and a virtuous act, a good deed, an act of charity. Okay, charity doesn't necessarily always have to be that you give someone money and let them keep it, right? That's a better form of charity, but you could loan someone money temporarily, and that can also be a form of charity. Obviously, smiling at someone can be charity. There's a lot of form of charity, but a loan is a type of charity. Okay, now what happens instead? Same scenario. The man gives Aisha $100 because she's in need, and then he says, you know what? Don't just give me $100 back. Give me $110 back. So I'm giving you $100 now, but instead I want you to give me $110 in the future because you use my money. I want you to pay rent on it, or basically he wants to charge interest on it. This Islamically would be haram, because this is an exploitation of a need. Very, very clear. It's called istighlal. It's exploitation of a need. And the Quran says, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ. Do not take someone's wealth unjustly. Okay? So the first one is how Islam thinks of loans, which is do not charge interest on it. The second one is how the modern world looks at loans. So this is how things work in the modern world, because even if you give, the modern world is really bad. Even if you want to gift something to someone, there's a gift tax, right? The government wants to take a tax from that to the person who's paying the gift. And let's say you want to loan someone money, okay? I wanted to loan some money to my cousin. This happened to me. If you want to loan someone money, the tax law says if you don't charge interest, first of all, if you charge interest on it, you will pay tax on it, okay? So let's say I charge him 5% interest. The tax will take maybe 20% of that away. So I will pay $1 to the government, right? So I loan $100, I get 5 extra back. One of them I have to give to the government. But the tax law also says if you give a loan and you do not charge interest on it, you will be taxed as if you charged interest on it, okay? So the modern system is really messed up. So if I give someone a loan and I give them qard hasana, I don't charge them any interest, the government will still ask me to pay tax on that interest. Okay, it's pretty messed up. Okay, so Islam isn't against, I just want to clarify, Islam isn't against making money. Okay, Islam isn't against investments. However, Islam has a separate concept for loans versus investments. And if you want to make money, that's an investment. If you want to help someone, that's a loan. And you have to make a choice that you're either making a loan or an investment. Okay, and we'll talk about investments. So let's talk about the concept of money really quick. How does money work? For those who've studied economics, money has a few different functions, okay? Money is a medium of exchange. So back in the day, we had to do everything with barter, right? Sell me this many crops for that many crops, this many animals for that many that many of this or whatever. But that's really not a scalable mechanism, right? So if, for example, I wanted to sell you my iPhone and I wanted to buy some dates from you, it would be very hard to do that. Every time, like, you'd have to find enough dates and other things that I want to buy to add up to the value of my iPhone. So you'd be looking, lots of dates. What else do you want to buy? I want to buy this. But there's nothing else I want to buy. So how would we make that exchange? It requires that both of us want something in equal quantities. It's very hard to do. So money provides this ability to be a medium of exchange to make that easier. The other thing money does, which is related, is it's a unit of account. So it helps us measure value. I can say this iPhone is $1,000, or I can say, something else is $5 or $10. It allows us to measure value in something quantifiable, making our life a lot easier. The other thing that's discussed as a function of money in economics is it's a store of value. Okay, so it's a way that I can take my earnings and put them into money and put it somewhere. Okay. Now, this concept of store of value is actually what's not recognized in Islam. Okay, and this is part of the reason of the prohibition, because Islam doesn't want you to take money and just put it aside and do nothing with it. Now, don't get me wrong. You can certainly have a certain amount of savings in your bank account. Nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly halal. What Islam is trying to prevent is money just sitting there doing nothing, because it's not benefiting anybody. Okay, so even if you have savings, Islam wants you to invest it. It wants you to put that into something productive. It wants you to establish a business. It wants you to create employment. It wants you to produce goods and services that benefit the world. Okay, and that's why it doesn't want money to just sit there, or money to be used just to earn money on it. Okay, so this is also why zakah only applies on idle money that's sitting there. If you have money in a business, most of that business you don't have to pay zakah on, right? All of the assets of the business that produce things, you don't have to pay zakah on. So Islam wants you to put money into use. It's not that Islam's against the rich. It's not it at all. It just doesn't want the money to sit there. It wants the rich to invest that money back and do something productive with it, and not just earn money on it, okay? And of course, we talked about how Thomas Aquinas said the same thing. This is not an Islamic concept, by the way. This concept of store of value is something that's debated by philosophers and people of ethics who are even outside of the fold of religion, right? So they look at it and they say, hey, should money be a store of value? And they say, no, money doesn't have intrinsic value. It really shouldn't. And this is why also in Islam we realize that money is an end to something and not a means. Okay, so money is a ghaya, not a wasila. It doesn't itself have any value. Money only has value because you can buy something else with it, which is a productive good or a productive service. Money itself has no value, and that is why it isn't something to store, and it isn't something that you rent out. And that is why sometimes Islamic finance is called asset-based financing or asset-backed financing, because it isn't just dealing with money, it's dealing with productive goods. Okay. Another concept that we learn, and this is we learn from Ahadith, is al-kharaj bil-daman. Okay. And again, this is a concept that we can come up with intellectually as well, which is the person who has the money has to accept some risk and some liability in order to earn money on it. Okay, so if you're just loaning money and getting money back on it, you're not taking any risk, any liability. And in fact, if you are lending someone money and you aren't taking liability, then guess what? They are taking liability. If they lose money, they're taking that liability, right? And so Islam just wants you to take on the responsibility that comes with the money. Another thing I wanted to briefly mention is time value of money. So this is like, I think, chapter 1, probably page 1 of finance, where you learn that money available today is worth more than the same amount in the future. Okay? Money today is worth more than in the future. So for example, $100 today is worth 110 in the future, or 110 in the future is worth 100 today. Now you're going to say, but didn't you say that humans have this flawed concept of discounting? Yes. So here's the story, okay? The way that conventional finance explains this, it says, look, if I had $100 today, I could have put that in a business. I could have, inflation happens. I could have earned more money on it. I could have made so much more. It would be 110 in the future. So if you give me 100 in the future, that is less. That is worth less. Instead, give me 100 today. So they want their money as soon as possible, right? That's correct. That concept makes sense because, yes, you can invest the money. However, humans tend to discount it even more than they should. Okay, that's the behavioral economics issue. Anyway, this isn't super important to understand, other than the fact that the scholars have discussed, is there time value of money or not? I personally argue that actually in Islam, there is no time value of money. If you have money sitting around, we do not believe that inflation changes anything. So I know some of the scholars have allowed for that, but if, for example, you put your money in a bank and they say, we will give you an amount that is equal to inflation as a rate of return, that is haram, okay? And if you give a loan and you say, at least pay me how much inflation has happened over that period of time, that would be considered haram as well, okay? So I just wanted to make it clear that even though some people have talked about that inflation or inflation charges are absolutely not acceptable, and that Islam does not recognize the time value of money. Rather, Islam recognizes the time value of assets, okay? That is why if I give you $100 and I say you give me 110 back in a year, that's not acceptable. But if I say, I'll sell you my phone and charge you an extra $50, that is acceptable because it's the time value of the asset, that I didn't benefit from the asset, not time value of money, okay? And then there's lots of quotes and lots of different material from different scholars talking about prohibition of riba and how it's the basis, how it's bad. It hampers the real interests because you don't do anything valuable with it. It doesn't promote skills in industry and construction. It just causes money to be made and money. Okay. A couple more quick things before we break for Asr prayer in UK. Number one, I wanted to clarify the concept of debt versus equity because I know a lot of people don't know these terms. So what is debt? Debt is basically, in modern day terms, debt is an interest-based loan. So someone owes you money and they charge you interest on that. And what happens in debt is, if I loan you money, both you have to return my money exactly how much you took, and you have to give me the interest or the return on it exactly how much you took. So if you borrowed $100, interest was 10, you have to get me back $110 completely. Okay, whether I was investing it, whether you were investing it in something, whatever you're using for, it doesn't matter. You have to give exactly that amount back. Okay, so you can actually, in modern day, invest in something using debt. So I can say, I want to put money into this company, and I'm going to put $100 in, and they will owe me back $110, guaranteed. Okay, guaranteed. Versus equity. Equity is, for example, partnership or shares of common stock, shares that you buy from the stock market, etc., where you put your money into a business and the value of the business may go up and the value of the business may go down. So if I invest $100, it's not guaranteed that I will get the $100 back. Not only is there not a guarantee I may not make a profit, there's no guarantee that I will even get the $100 back. I may get $80 back or 50 or 0. So the first one, debt, is completely wrong in Islam, and the second one is exactly how we're supposed to invest. Okay, and I'll go through maybe one simple example before we break. Okay, so how is interest-based debt unjust? How is it unfair? This is how debt works. Okay, so again, we have a man who's loaning money to Aisha. And let's say Aisha is then taking that money and she's putting it into a business. That little graph is the stock market. So she's putting it into her business or stock market or her own ice cream shop or a hospital, whatever it is she's building, right? So he loans her $100. She puts that $100 into a business. She doubles it. Alhamdulillah, she does really, really well. And then because it's based on debt, this is how debt works, he only gets an interest rate, he gets $110, right? So she doubled the money, but he only gets 10%. But you know what? He's happy, he got 10%. Again, I don't mean to imply that the Saudis are doing business with interest or something like that. This is just a man and a woman, okay? Let's just call it that. And so he gets $110, okay? Now let's say, same situation, he loaned her $100, she lost 100%. She lost all of that money. What does he get back? He still gets back $110. Okay, so that's how, because the transaction here, this person is doing equity, Aisha, and this man with the woman is debt. So no matter what happens, she owes her the full amount. And Islamically, this is considered unjust. Why? Because whether she profits or she loses, he gets exactly the same amount and it does not change. Okay? Now, this doesn't have to be with a person in need, and it doesn't have to be with a person who is poor. What's wrong is always wrong. Even if Aisha is rich, okay? Even if she is rich, if she has to pay him interest, it's not a big deal, $110, it is still incorrect. Because Islamically, just because something is haram for the poor doesn't mean it becomes halal for the rich. Gambling is haram for the poor. Is it halal for the rich? No, it's haram for the rich as well. Stealing from the rich to give to the poor, is that okay in Islam? No, absolutely not, right? So that is why it is haram for all people. And the rich are always trying to just get richer and richer and trying to get a guaranteed return. And the problem that has become now is that these investors don't want to risk losing their money. So they accumulate their wealth and they don't want to lose it. So they just want to do debt-based financing because they don't want to lose their money, because no matter what, they're guaranteed their full amount, right? So that's why we're in the situation we're in. And by the way, if two people agree to do this together and they say, you know what, we're rich, we agree to this, we'll put it in the contract, doesn't that make it halal if two people are doing it willingly? There's no injustice, no exploitation, everybody knows what's going on. No, there is injustice. Just because you write in the contract and you say, I agree to this, I'm happy with this, all of this, it's still unjust. You know, if maybe you're rich and maybe somebody stole some money from you and they gave it to the poor and maybe you're happy with that. That doesn't make it just. It still leaves it unjust. Okay, so we'll pause here, inshallah, for maybe like 7 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll finish up the concept of riba, hopefully in a few minutes, and then we will get to Islamic financial contracts. So we'll break for 7 minutes, inshallah. 5 is too short. People should pray long enough, but I don't want them to be praying lots of sunnahs right now because I think we need to move on with class. In the meantime, for anyone who is not praying Asr, people, for example, who are in the US or other time zones or who've prayed already, if you have questions, I'll take them now. Time value of money, I can buy a house for 100,000 now. If I let it to someone and get only 100,000 back after 10 years, I can't buy that same house now. Is it for the increase? Nasser's asking the question about time value of money, and he said, did this concept exist back in the earlier days because of inflation? Was inflation an issue back in the day? Inflation, inflation has been there, but inflation is actually greatly compounded because of interest. So interest causes inflation, and the current monetary policy, it causes inflation to happen even more. But the way we get past interest is by investing our money. Okay, so if we want to counter interest, what we do is we invest it, not by giving people loans and charging interest on it. Alternatively, if I want the amount of gold, I want the same amount of gold back. If you loan someone gold, can you ask for the gold back? Yeah, that's fine. If you want to loan someone gold and then get the gold back, that's after a few years, the same amount of gold, exactly the same quality, that's not a problem. And you're saying that gold typically retains its value over the years. There's been many years where, many years in a row where gold got a really good beating. So it's not necessarily true. Actually, gold went out of fashion a little while ago. It might be coming back in now with the concerns of recession and so on. The question Fahim is asking is, Islamic financial concept of loans. If you loan someone money, then you get the same amount back. You've actually lost some money, right? That's the question. Like, that's the argument anyway. You've lost some money. Yes, you have lost some money, but you did this for charity. So if your $100 became 95, it's okay. The loan was only for the sake of Allah to begin with. If you're trying to invest money, if you're trying to make money, don't do it as loans. What are the rulings regarding coins that have higher value? And what's the question exactly? What about the coins? How do you answer the objection of people who say Islamic banking and taking loan from the bank is the same thing because you're taking the same amount of money? Abu Muhsin, I will absolutely answer that question, inshallah. That's coming up. Are you allowed to sell coins? Yes, you are allowed to sell coins. When you sell coins, the coins have a certain value. What you need to do is whatever you're trading them with. So for example, like currency for currency, right? Or coin. A lot of coins now, there's like this concept of like rare coins and things like that. You can trade it. You have to know the value, and you trade it at exactly that value, and you don't make a profit on that. And you do it at exactly the same time. Like you trade that, you give them the coins, they give you the cash, and that transaction's complete. Regarding debts, okay. Regarding bills which are not past due, are they considered a debt shar'an? So if the question is regarding phone, rent, and internet, if you get a bill, is that considered a debt from a Shari'i standpoint? Yes, it is considered part of, would be considered part of dain. So if you have, for example, a phone bill due, then that is something that you owe to someone and you must pay it. Do not take too long to pay that bill and have them charge you interest or a late fee, because that late fee becomes interest, and that is problematic because now you are a payer of interest. What is the difference between Islamic mortgage and conventional mortgage? I am actually going to go into that with detail, inshallah. Traditional versus Islamic banks. In some ways, they seem the same, right? I will go into that. I will explain how they are the same and how they are different, inshallah. How is a late fee considered interest? A late fee is considered interest because it is money that you owe, and now you are charging money on it. Let me give you another example, okay? The iPhone, this iPhone, right? I sold it for $1,050. Let's say a year comes by, a year goes past, and you don't pay me back. $1,050, you don't pay me back. Am I allowed to charge you a late fee? The answer is no. Okay. The answer is no, because the price of the good must be set exactly at the time of the contract, and it cannot change beyond that. And once the contract is completed, the $1,050 that I owe you actually just became a loan. Okay, at that point, it became a loan. So if I charge extra on it, I'm charging interest or riba. What could you do regarding a late fee? Because you still have to pay it. If you get charged a late fee by accident, you can usually call the people up and beg them for it. They will usually remove it, especially if you have a good credit. If it's the first time you're paying it late, learn the lesson from that, and they will usually waive it and then try and put it on automatic payment so it gets cut from your bank account so that you never get a late fee ever again. What about if the late fee is a clause in the contract? So I'm now being asked, what if the late fee is a clause in the contract? Even if the late fee is a clause in the contract, it is absolutely not acceptable. The reason it is not acceptable is because the price of the product or the service must be known at the time at which you signed the contract, and it must be one price. So if I say, I will give you this phone for $1,000 today, or $1,050 if you pay me 1 year from now. Okay? That's what I say. $1,000 today or $1,050 1 year from now. And I give you the phone, and we don't clarify if you're paying me today, if you're paying me a year from now. That is an invalid contract. It's an invalid contract because the price is not clear. The price needs to be clear. That's why late fees can't happen later. Sheikh Kamran, like, I hope that answers your question as well. There is only one price that you can have for the transaction. And the contract cannot have two prices. It cannot say if you pay by this date, it will be this amount. If you pay by a later date, it will be another amount. That is absolutely not permissible. Is it permissible to use credit cards? Yeah, all the scholars have allowed the use of credit cards as long as the payment is made before the due date so that there's never interest on it. Or the index tracking exchange trade defense halal do it or markets halal. Yeah, that's coming later, inshallah. Abu Muhsin, not sure if I answered your question or not. We can get to it later, inshallah. Okay, let's get back to the topic. So we talked about how, in the most basic example, interest-based debt is unjust, right? So we talked about how this person does not benefit from the profits nor the losses. They always get the same amount. Going back to al-kharaj bil-daman, right? Like the person who owns the money, they should be taking the liability and they should be getting the profit or the loss. Why is this other person only getting the profit or the loss? That is unfair. Okay? Let's look at another example. Debt also creates unfair partnerships. Okay, I'll go through this example and there's a couple more questions. I'll answer those. Okay, so what Islam wants to see is fair partnership. So what happens? Let's go through this example. Okay, so this is modern finance. I have two investors who are giving money to Aisha. One is giving money as equity, and the other one is giving money as debt. Okay, so both of them are giving $100 each. Aisha is investing this money in the market, and she doubles it. Okay, so she earns $200. Now, what happens? The way this works is we talked about the difference between debt and equity. The debt person, actually, first let's talk about the equity. She doubled the money. So the person who's dealing with equity, what's considered halal in the fair way, he will get $200 because she doubled the money, he doubles the money. The debt investor only gets back the interest, right? Similarly, what happens if she loses the money? So they each give her $100, she invests $200, and she loses half of it, so it became $100. Now what happens is, the first thing that happens because of the way that debt and equity work is the debt holder, because he's guaranteed, right? The debt holder is guaranteed to get their money back. They will get back 100. Actually, I should have made this 110 and 110, right? So this should be 110. That's a mistake in the slide. That's 110 there and 110 there. And the equity investor gets 0 because all of it went to the debt investor. Okay, now let's just kind of take a look at this very quick. What happened is two people invested $100. In one case, one got back 200, the other got back 110. So the equity investor did a lot better than the debt investor, made a lot more money. In another scenario, they both put in $100. The equity investor lost all of his money, and the debt investor got 110 back, right? So basically what this is the unfairness that Islam does not want. It does not want two partners who are putting in the same amount of money to get back a different amount of money. This is unfair, this is unjust. Islam wants ta'awun, it wants partnership, it wants cooperation. It wants both of them to win, and if they win by the same amount, and if they happen to both of them lose, they should lose the same amount of money. So you can see how debt and equity investors don't fare the same way depending on how an investment performs. Okay. So this is another reason why Islam does not like debt-based investment, because it creates unfairness. Here's a more complicated example. I'll go through this rather quickly. So let's say you have a pharmaceutical company that makes medicines and vaccines and so on, and they have the opportunity to invest money. So this arrow is showing they're investing in the coronavirus vaccine. And then this is the amount that comes back to them from investing in the coronavirus vaccine, okay? So the amount that they have to invest is this company is worth $40 billion. It's not a surprise, pharmaceutical companies are worth a lot of money. So this company has to invest $22 billion in the coronavirus vaccine. Now, they don't know if this vaccine is going to work or it's not going to work. So it might work, and if it works, they're going to make $400 billion from it. Okay, they're going to make a lot of money. And if it doesn't work, they're going to lose the entire $22 billion. Okay, they'll lose the entire $22 billion, and they'll just have 0 coming back. So they'll only be worth $18 billion. Okay. Now, let's say you're an equity investor in this company. Let's say we have a couple of equity investors. Let's say this is you. Okay, so you own 20% of the 50% of the company, $20 billion. Someone else owns 50% of the company, is 20 billion. So this company that's 40 billion, I'm making it simple, is owned by two people, 20 billion each. And then they have this opportunity to invest in this vaccine. If you were the investor, would you invest in this vaccine? Do you want the company to invest in the vaccine? Don't think about like the benefit of coronavirus vaccine and all that, just from a money. Let's say you just care about the money. Would you invest in this from a money standpoint? I'm not getting many answers. I'm getting yes, yes, yes. Actually, you know what? The answer you shouldn't just jump to a yes, okay? If all you care about, yes, good answer, Sheikh Nabil. The answer is I would look at the risk. Very high risk. Okay, that's the right answer, right? Because if you're investing, forget the fact that coronavirus, we want to get rid of it and all that, that's good for humanity. Look at it purely from a money standpoint, okay? We don't know what the risk is. So let's say I give you, it's important to know the risk. If I said there's only a 2% chance that they'll be successful, this is probably not where you want to put your life savings, right? This is probably not where you want to put all your money. There's only a 2% chance of success. If instead I said there's a 98% chance of success and a 2% chance of failure. So 98% or 99% chance they're actually going to make $400 billion. And only a 1% chance you're going to lose all your money. That sounds pretty good, right? 99% chance you're going to make 400 billion. 1% chance you're going to lose the money. Okay, and when you lose the money, your 20 billion becomes 9 billion, right? Because the value of the company becomes 18, you lose $11 billion. But 99% chance it's going to become 400 billion. And so your value is going to be 200 billion. Okay? So everybody wants to invest now? I hope. 99% chance of success? Okay. Now, this is what happens if I change one of the investors and I say he's a debt investor. Same scenario, 20 billion coming in from here, 20 billion coming from there. As a debt investor, if you're the debt investor and all you care about is money, would you invest? And I'm not going to wait for the answers. The answer is no. You will not invest. Why? The reason you will not invest is that if you invest, and even there's a 99% chance, let's say they make the vaccine, the debt holder gains nothing from it because they're not getting any value from the vaccine. They're just getting their interest. They don't care. They have no value for that. And if you lose the money, the debt holder is going to lose money and they want to get their guarantee back. So now you have the equity investor who wants to invest in this project and the debt investor who doesn't want to invest in this project, and you have a conflict of interest. So the investors, the company, its employees, the world, the economy, the hospitals, everybody wants this company to invest, but this debt investor over here doesn't want to invest because there's a chance that they can lose a little bit of money, right? So it creates this conflict of interest. This is not, I don't know if everyone followed the example, but these are just some of the simple examples I could come up with. I can make them, I can come up with many more, but Riba does create all of these different challenges, okay? Now, moving on, I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is not new information. I mean, when I was doing my master's for the entire time, the years that I was doing it, I kept looking at Riba and kept going, oh my God, this creates so much fitna, creates so many challenges, so many problems that people don't realize. And economists have studied this, and they look at macroeconomics, and they look at, how does it affect inflation of a country, and what happens when you're dealing with fractional reserve, and we're doing 95% speculative transactions. Right now, there's a $5.1 trillion daily turnover of Ribawi transactions, right? And money supply that doesn't exist. So it's really bad for the economy. And I don't want to get into too much detail. It's not only bad for any country's economy, it's bad for the world economy. especially the third world countries. The third world countries do not benefit from any of these loans that are given. The World Bank was asked if they could name one project that was extremely successful, and they couldn't name it. They didn't name a project. In fact, they just said, you know what, our success rate is less than 50%. They didn't name a project that was successful. They said, you know, it's less than 50%, but they didn't say how much less than 50%. So it's really bad. So anyway, just a recap of why riba is prohibited. And again, I could do a semester-long class on this, but we're restricting ourselves to just a few different examples. Money is not a productive good. It is a means, not an end. It is used to get something else. Therefore, you shouldn't be making money on money because that is not productive or beneficial to society. By the way, that's not just Islamic. You know, the economists discuss this. Money itself is not providing benefit. It's what money does that provides the benefit. Loans are supposed to be for charity, not for exploiting. Using loans for investments is incorrect because we should be taking risk when we invest. If we don't take the risk, someone else is taking the risk. So that's not true partnership. So in any transaction, if we have the money and we don't take the risk, someone else is taking that risk, and that is not fair. Debt investments create a conflict of interest, like we looked at with the pharmaceutical company. And this is not a good formula for partnership because you're creating a rational conflict of interest, okay? It's bad for the macroeconomics of a country. The rich get richer as they keep taking their money and getting more and more and more. The poor get poor. You get inflation. And it is bad for the world economy. It's unjust to third world countries, and it exploits them. And again, these answers are from a religious standpoint, philosophical standpoint, and research and experience has shown this. There's a ton of research on these topics. And whether we're talking about riba at the poor person, to the rich person in need, to the person who's not in need but just wants to invest it, to partnerships, to companies, to countries, to the entire world, riba is bad, 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 and bad at every single level, okay? And then people use different arguments to justify riba. So some people say, you know, the Prophet ﷺ, he only forbade riba in the last year because he mentioned it in his farewell khutbah that the first riba to be voided is the riba that's due to the family of Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. So, you know, it's the first, he said that was the first riba that's prevented, and that was given in the final sermon before he passed away. And so it's not really clear, you know, what is riba, because, you know, he did it so much at the end and people are confused about it. And the answer to that is absolutely not. We can see that riba was voided many years before that. Banu Thaqif and others, you know, their claims were removed a while ago. And this was just the Prophet ﷺ saying in that khutbah that the first one I'm mentioning in this khutbah is that the riba due to the family of Abbas is being voided. Similarly, he said other things in the khutbah, and those weren't for the first time. He talked about alcohol. It wasn't the first time he was talking about alcohol. He talked about mistreating women and so on, and how these are bad. And so this wasn't the first time he was talking about riba. Also, there's a hadith which people quote and say, didn't Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhu, didn't he say in Bukhari, it's narrated that the last verse to be revealed was the verse of riba? And the answer is sort of yes, because those verses that I shared with you that start with الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ رِبَا, that page ends with وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. So it ends with that verse, which is connected with the verses of riba. Those other verses were actually revealed earlier. That verse, which is connected to the verse of riba, was revealed towards the end of the Prophet's lifetime, and possibly was the last verse that was revealed in the Quran. And this is mentioned even in Sahih al-Bukhari. The verse is the explanation of this verse is given under verse 281 and not verse 275 to 280. So it's separated out as a verse that came later. And Tabari's commented on it. Many of the Mufassirun have commented on this. That last verse is actually not directly prohibiting riba itself. It's just the conclusion of that page, the conclusion of that thought, and that's the verse that came at the end. There's also people who say, you know, that Umer radiallahu anhu, he said, there are three things I wish the Prophet explained to us better. You know, one of them was riba. And so, you know, if Umer radiallahu anhu, if he didn't understand riba, how can we understand riba? And the answer is, would Allah really say that he's going to declare war against someone if they deal with riba if he has not made riba clear? Obviously, Allah made riba very clear. What Umar radiallahu anhu was referring to there was the prevention of riba al-fadl, which we didn't get into in detail, which is, you know, exchanging gold for gold and dates for dates and things like that, which we didn't get a ton of detail on. Okay, another argument that's used is riba is only when you when the contract doesn't say that there will be interest, and then when the loan becomes due and you don't pay it, that's when you say, oh, you're not paying it back, now I'll charge you interest. So as long as it's put into the contract, then it should be fine. And the answer is no. There's absolutely no evidence to prove this. Absolutely no evidence at all. In fact, historically, riba has been known to be stipulated at the time of the transaction itself. And Jaslas talks about this. And he says, Riba of Jahiliyyah is a loan given for a stipulated period with a stipulated increase, stipulated meaning. It was determined at the time of the transaction. It wasn't something that was added later on. Imam Razi quotes exactly the same definition. So this argument has absolutely no basis if you go back and study both how riba was conducted as well as the tafsir of the Quran and how it took place. Some people say, well, you know, I understand what you mean about like that person in need and not exploiting them, but how about the person who's not in need, who's going in to invest in stocks? You know, that's not exploiting someone. The U.S. government isn't exploiting me if I buy U.S. bonds, or the bank's not exploiting me if they give me money to buy a house. In fact, the bank is helping me buy a house. And there's been fatwas on this and so on. But it's important to note that the riba in Quran and Hadith is an absolute prohibition. Okay, we talked about this earlier. If just because you don't feel like you're being exploited because you're a billionaire, does that mean you can go to a casino and gamble? Can you just go and lose $1,000 because it's not a big deal? You have $1 billion, and the answer is absolutely not. The Quran absolutely prohibits riba completely. Okay, and this concept of consumptive versus productive loans, I need it for food versus I need it for investment, there's absolutely no basis for this. Just like everything else, intoxicants are forbidden. Allah didn't say, khamar, that's just alcohol from grapes, so beer, which is from barley, that should be okay. No, absolutely not. And there's a ton of research that shows, if you just go through history, to find all of the different productive loans that were taking place at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And I have 10 different examples listed here. Abdullah Ibn Sa'd said that Umar radiallahu anhu sent a trade caravan to Syria, borrowed 4,000 dirhams. Zubair's liabilities at death were 2.2 million dirhams. This is in Bukhari. There's, these are all based on commercial loans that they took and not productive loans, and we have this in our history books. And then another argument that's used is that the prohibition is only for highly exploitative rates. So if I charge 20%, that's a problem. But what if I only charge 2%? That's not a big deal. And the argument that they use is, Quran says, that if you're compounding, that's what's not allowed. But in another verse, it just says, it doesn't say compounding. And we have to understand how we interpret the Quran. Right? So the fuqaha and the scholars who are participating in this class, they already know the answer of how we answer these questions. First of all, it's very clear when Allah said in the Quran, وَذَرُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَا, give up whatever remains of the riba. The word مَا بَقِيَ, it means anything that remains of the riba must be given up. And then he says, لَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ, only your principal comes back to you. So it's very, very clear in the Quran. And also, we have to understand how the Quran uses language. So for example, in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, وَلَا تَشْتَرُوا بِآيَاتِ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا. Do not sell my verses. This is Allah speaking. Do not sell my verses for a small price or for a little price. Does that mean we can sell Allah's verses for a large price? Because he only says, وَلَا تَشْتَرُوا بِآيَاتِ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا. Right? Do not sell my verses for a small price. So what if I, don't sell it for a small price? What if I do it for a very large price and I'm making millions of dollars? No, of course not. Of course it's not allowed. We can never do that. So we know the style of the Quran is that Allah is saying, وَلَا تَشْتَرُوا بِآيَاتِ, do not sell my verses. And then he's explaining that the price that we're selling them for is, no matter what the price is, it's small. Right? So similarly, we think we're compounding our money either by charging a compound interest rate or loaning the same money again and again and again. We think we're increasing increase. But Allah is saying that that's not what's going to happen with the money. Right? Okay, there's also a lot of clear ahadith about this, and I hope this answers some of the debates. I have a lot more content on this, but I'm going to skip as we're running out of time. So the question becomes, is capitalism permissible? You know, anyone who studied economics, they know that capitalism is described as having 4 factors of production. This is what you need in order to establish capitalism. You need land, you need people, you need entrepreneur, someone who's going to run a business, and you need capital. And capital is where the money comes from. And if you don't have money, if you don't have banks, then you're not going to have a business. And how is someone going to give you money if they're not going to earn a return on it? So does this completely destroy capitalism? How is economics supposed to work in this case? And the answer is, are Islamic banks supposed to be charitable? That's the question, right? Do all banks have to become charities now because they can't charge an interest rate? Can people in WizIQ, Abu Sayyid, Alim, Abdullah, Khalid, can you guys hear me? Okay. Mufti Saab, they can hear me fine. I think maybe someone, 1 or 2 people are having an issue maybe. So maybe the problem is on their end. Okay, so are banks supposed to become charitable? The answer is no, banks do not become charitable. Again, like I said, charity is a different concept. You give that to people in need. Banks would be there for investment. Banks would still make money. How would the banks make money? They become profit and loss sharing organizations. Okay, so when you put your deposit in the bank takes that money, it invests it in money-making schemes. Inshallah, they will earn a higher return because equity usually makes more money than debt does. And then people say, well, what if the bank loses the money? There's always a chance of loss, right? But when a bank is going to invest the money, just like when you will invest the money, they're going to see which projects will probably make the money. So they'll go and invest in those projects which are likely to make the money, and not invest in those projects which won't make the money. And also the banks will diversify across many, many, many investments. So if there's 100 investments and 3 of them lose money, that's okay because 97 of them made money. So going back to capitalism, in Islam, yes, the concept of capital does not exist, but it's just different because the entrepreneur brings the money. So the entrepreneur is taking the money and either doing profit or loss, basically doing profit and loss with it. He's just not allowed to make money on money. Okay. Now, before we get into the details of capitalism and stocks and are they okay or not, let's take a quick detour and talk about M&Ms. Okay. M&M. Everyone familiar with M&M? Abdullah, student loan is not considered an investment in the student. It is considered a charitable loan. Then, therefore, you cannot charge interest on it. Okay, so actually, wrong M&M. Wrong M&M. Okay, what I want to talk about is the Miller-Modigliani theorem. So Franco Modigliani and Merton Miller are Nobel Prize winners because of their work in finance. And in 1958, they came up with the Miller-Modigliani theorem. Okay, and I'll skip the details of the equation. Basically, it's called the capital structure irrelevance principle. Okay, and what this says is whether a company raises money through debt or it raises money through equity, it doesn't impact the profitability and the operations and the functions and the viability and the sustainability of the organization. Actually, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect their profitability. So capitalism can completely work without debt because you can do everything using equity, and that is what their theorem proved. And they did this with a lot of math. I'm sparing the calculus over here. This is just the simple equation, okay? However, what they also showed is because of the way that tax laws are structured, because the rich created tax laws, actually the equation changes, and what happens is that debt is preferred to equity. So interest becomes now much more interesting because of the way the tax laws are structured. So unfortunately, even though capitalism can work, by making some small adjustments, the tax laws are not designed to do that. Okay, but that doesn't mean we can't do our transactions in a halal way. So let's get to that. So what is permitted, right? First of all, the basic concept in Islam is al-aslu fil ashya'i al-ibaha, that the default ruling in anything is permissibility, which means that in Islam, when it comes to mu'amalat, when it comes to dealing with other people, when it comes to whether it's driving cars, conducting business, transactions, whatever, the default is that everything is halal, unless it is explicitly prohibited. For example, riba. So if we can understand that, I don't have to go into so many details about so many transactions, because all we're trying to do is avoid, for example, riba, right? And there's a few other minor things, but mainly riba. And this comes from a hadith in Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, فَبَعْثَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى نَبِيَّهُ, that Allah sent the Prophet ﷺ, وَأَنزَلَ كِتَابَهُ, and he revealed the book, وَأَحْلَلَ حَلَالَهُ وَحَرَمَ حَرَامَهُ, and then he made the halal things halal and the haram things haram. وَمَا أَحَلَّ فَهُوَ حَلَال, and whatever he made halal is halal. وَمَا حَرَمَ فَهُوَ حَرَام, whatever he made haram is haram. وَمَا سَكَتَ عَنْهُ فَهُوَ عَفْوٌ, and then anything he didn't speak about, it's totally fine, right? So we get this principle from the narration of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, so let's build on this. Based on this, we can trade, we can barter, we can buy and sell. Can we buy and sell for a profit? We can buy and sell, but can we buy and sell for a profit? Yes. Okay, good. The answer is yes, we can buy and sell for a profit. Nothing wrong with that, okay? We can seek employment, we can work for other people, we can rent things, we can invest things, okay? We can invest things, nothing wrong with investment, but the investment must have profit and loss share, okay? Now, Islam basically isn't against private ownership. Islam isn't against the market economy. It isn't against market forces, as we learned in economics. It isn't against people making profit. It isn't against any of these things. They're all halal. It just puts certain conditions on these things to make sure that they're done in a halal way. So if you study Quduri and fiqh, you learn, you must sell something that exists. You can't sell something you don't own. I can't sell something that belongs to someone else. The price must be known, things like that. There's a lot of conditions around it, but you must do it otherwise it is permitted, right? So Islam is just trying to put some some restrictions to make things just and fair. It wants to remove exploitation, and it wants to remove oppression. And one of these oppressions and exploitations it wants to remove is interest or riba. Okay. So what is not allowed? What is not allowed? First of all, the way to think about this is Islamic finance is equal to ethical finance. Anything that is good, Islam allows. Anything that is bad, Islam does not allow. So whether you were a Christian or Jew or Hindu or Muslim, these rules are kind of the same, except we follow these rules as Muslims, and the other people have sort of lost their way and they don't follow these rules anymore. Okay. But if you think about it, these are just general good principles. So a very obvious one of the fiqh principles we have is anything that is permissible, anything that is impermissible itself, you can't do business in it because it's impermissible. Okay, so this is kind of obvious, but if I'm selling pork, if I'm selling alcohol, if I run a casino, deal with pornography, those businesses would not be allowed. Okay, and there's many evidences for this in the Quran. We don't. Common sense should be evidence enough. There's many evidences from the Quran. There's many hadith about this topic. Sa'ad radiallahu anhu asked the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, what is the secret, or how do I get all of my du'as answered? And the Prophet ﷺ said, make sure that whatever you're consuming is halal, and your du'as will be answered. Okay, so this is an obvious one. Dishonesty and cheating, obviously, again, common sense will tell us, we have all of Surah Mutaffifin about this. In Surah Hud, we talk about the people of Shu'aib and how they were cheating people. And there's just many examples in the Quran and many ahadith as well. The Prophet ﷺ says, وَمَنْ حَمَلَ عَلَيْنَا السِّلَاحَ فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا, that whoever bears arms against us is not one of us. وَمَنْ غَشَّنَا فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا, whoever cheats one of us is not one of us as well. And there's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ saw a man selling some food, some fruits, and he put his hand inside the fruits, and he felt that some of the fruits inside were damaged by rain. And he said, owner of the food, what's going on here? And the man said, oh, that was some of the fruit that's damaged by the rain. And the Prophet ﷺ said, why did you put this damaged food? Why didn't you put it at the top so people can see it? Because whoever cheats us is not one of us. So again, there's many hadith, and we know cheating is wrong, and we can derive this from logic. And then lastly, what is not allowed is injustice, which is profits and losses. which means that profits and losses should be shared, and therefore riba is an issue. Okay. So these principles I'm talking about are not unique to Islam. In fact, I only found out a few weeks ago that if you go in Yahoo Finance, I looked up the stock ticker for Tesla, and if you look up, you get the share price. Obviously, this is before the whole COVID-19 issue. Stock was at 700, now it's 500 and something, or maybe 400 and something. If you go to Yahoo Finance, at the very end, there's a little tab here called sustainability. And when you click on sustainability, it brings up these details. Okay, products and activities. It says, does this company deal with alcoholic beverages? Does it deal with gambling? Does it deal with tobacco? Does it deal with adult entertainment and pornography? Does it deal with controversial weapons? Does it deal with military contracting, pesticides? You would think this is a halal screen, right? It's like Islamic halal screen built into Yahoo Finance. But this isn't just built for Muslims, it's built for anybody and everybody. So these obviously are universal values, right? Here, obviously, it says Catholic values, right? But you can see, like, pornography, everybody knows is wrong. Alcohol, gambling, tobacco, all these are universal principles, okay? So the other principle I quickly want to talk about is form versus substance, because people ask questions about this as well. So what if I say I want to get an interest-based house financing from the Bank of America? I want to buy a house, I'm going to the Bank of America, I'm going to get an interest-based loan. Is this halal? Quick responses, please. Is this halal? No. Okay. What if I change it and I say Bank of Islam? Does that make it halal? There's a bank in California called La Ribā Bank. In words, it means a bank with no riba in it. Okay. However, that bank has some very interesting practices, and most people don't believe that it doesn't have riba. Anyway, what if I change the name interest to profit? Does that make it halal? Just changing the name. Somebody was asking, right? What if the contract says interest? Well, what if the contract says profit? Does that make it halal? I'm seeing people say yes. No. Changing, it doesn't matter what you call it. Okay? Just because I call it profit, yes. Someone's saying profit should be halal by logic. Yes, profits are halal by logic. But if I give you a loan for $100, and I say, give me back 110 at the end of the year, that 10 is not a profit, even if I call it a profit. The Sheikh Abdul Muhsin saying, al-umuru bi-maqasidiha is absolutely correct. Calling it profit doesn't make it profit. Okay? It has to be profit. What if I say Sharia compliant? What if I stamp the halal label on it? What if I say it's certified by Sheikh Umer? What if I say I've certified it, but it's still essentially the same loan, I just put my stamp on it? Does that make it halal? Still not halal? You don't trust me? People don't trust me, huh? Okay, inshallah, if everything goes on track, by next month, I will finish my Iftah course with Mufti Tawseef from Darul, Birmingham. So what if I say certified by Mufti Umer? Does that make it halal? The answer is no. I mean, changing the name of something or putting a label on it doesn't necessarily make it halal. You have to look at the contract itself, okay? This is an actual flyer that came to our house here in California, okay? One day meat sale. You guys see what's going on here? I didn't make this up. This came like 3-4 weeks ago to our house from the local supermarket. Now, these ground chicken thighs, yeah, they are halal, okay? But it's saying that this ground pork is halal as well. Someone's asking if I certified. What if we put Sharia compliant on it? What if we put my name on it, right? It doesn't make it halal because in the end, it's still pork, okay? So somebody made a mistake. Somebody made a mistake and put a halal label that doesn't make it halal. Okay? Calling something halal does not make it so. Calling something a profit doesn't make it profit. Yeah, Abdullah, you're right. It puts the chicken into question as well. Okay, so simple example. If I sell someone a watch, okay, or let's just say, I don't know, Zaid. Zaid sells Aisha a watch for $100, and they agree that this is how the transaction is going to work. However, they also agree to a second contract which says Aisha is going to sell the watch to Zaid a year from now, and he will give her $200. Okay. So Zaid is selling the watch to Aisha for $100. Is that halal? Just selling a watch. Yes, it's halal. Aisha is selling a watch to Zaid for $200. Is that halal? Yes, it's halal. This transaction is halal. This transaction is halal. But when you decide to do both of those transactions and you agree to that up front and say, let's sign two contracts, one for this one for this one, what you have effectively done, I'm going to click a button, is it's as if the watch didn't exist, okay? It's as if the watch didn't exist, because what all you're trying to do is trick the system, play a game. The Christians were trying to do this with the Medici Bank, and now we're trying to do this with Allah. Let me sell you a watch and you sell it back. Let's sign both of those contracts right now. And all you're trying to do is achieve a loan with interest on it, okay? So this is called hiyal. It's like a loophole or a workaround. And this is absolutely incorrect. And in fact, this is why there's a narration, a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, which says, Naha Rasulullah ﷺ an safqataini fi safqatin wahida. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ has forbidden that you have two contracts in one contract. Now, we have to look at the nature of the contract. But in this case, what we're trying to do is cheat the system. Even we're like, oh, two sales, that's halal. No, actually it's not, okay? So you have to be careful with these things. Okay, let's get into Islamic financial contracts. The first one I want to talk about is ijara. Ijara is actually fairly straightforward. Ijara is a rental contract or a employment contract. So if I rented that car from Honda, call it a lease, call it a rent, as long as it's not rent to own, okay? I don't want to mix ownership with renting yet. I know somebody asked a question about renting and ownership together. I will answer that question later, inshallah. I will answer that question later, inshallah. Okay, good. So this is just a simple rental. So if I rent a car from Honda, I rent an apartment from a landlord, or working for a company. This is also called ijara. Okay, it's very similar. Like the concept in Islam is very similar to how we do it conventionally. We have to follow all of the fiqh conditions. Like it has to be something that exists. It has to be something that you. It has to be something halal. It has to be something that you can't consume. I can't rent you some food and then you eat it, because then there's nothing to give back, right? It's a pretty straightforward contract. Another contract is, and moving on from rental, musharaka. Musharaka is the best type of Islamic partnership contract that we can have. So the way that musharaka works, it comes from the word shirka, and it's formed three mufa'alatun, so it's sharaka yushariku. First of all, for the scholars and the ulama, you will actually not find the word musharaka in the fiqh books. You will find other types of shirka. You'll find shirkatul milk, like ownership of an item. You'll find shirkatul aqd. You'll find shirkatul a'mal. You'll find shirkatul wujuh. You will find all kinds of shirkas, but you will not find the term musharaka. This is a modern term that has been put in place, and basically it's the equivalent in the fiqh books to shirkatul amwal. And having said all of that Arabic terminology, for those who don't follow that, basically it's a partnership in a business. So let's say me and my friend, we decide, he provides $100, I take $100, and we buy something, and then we go sell it. You know, we had bought it together for $200, and now we sell it. Whatever profit we made, we share. So all of the partners invest, and all of the partners share in the profit and the loss. Very, very simple, basic partnership contract where everybody invests and everybody benefits from the profit, or everybody loses a certain amount of money. Okay? Of course, again, like we said, the it has to be halal, the business has to be halal, if we're dealing in a product, the product must exist. All of those rules apply, but it's a simple partnership of people pooling their money together and doing something, okay? Now, how does profit work in musharaka? So let me ask you this question. Is it okay if we pool money together? We have partner A, my friend, and partner B, which is me, and we say, and we each put in, I don't know, $100,000. So 100,000 for my friend, 100,000 for me. We put it into the business, and then we say, partner A will guaranteed get 5,000 each month. Do you think that's halal? If someone's asking if it's a partnership between people or companies, it doesn't matter. It's just a partnership between people or companies. So both of us invested 100,000 each. Now we're saying partner A is going to get guaranteed 5,000 a month. Everyone's saying, no, it's not halal. Yes, it's not halal. The reason it's not halal is because you're fixing a profit, right? It's like getting riba, getting interest. Okay, what if I say partner A, I'm not going to say he's going to get 5,000 a month. I'm going to say he's going to get a percentage of the investment every month. So he's going to get 5% of the investment. Is that halal? Fahim said it's interest. Yes, correct. It's not halal either, right? It's really saying the same thing. It's really saying the same thing as the first one. What if I say partner A is going to get 50% of the profit? Is that halal? Halal. Okay, everybody says it's halal. Okay, good. So these are the basic rules of profit sharing, okay? Profit cannot be fixed to a specific amount. Profit cannot be fixed to the percentage of investment. Profit should be based on the percentage of the total profit, okay? Let me ask a different question. What if the partnership was not 50-50? Actually, we'll get to that. Let's ask a different question. Let's say the partnership is 50-50, okay? Partnership is 50-50. So partner A owns 50% of the company, but now we're saying partner A wants 60% of the profits. They only own 50% of the company, but they want 60% of the profits. So the other partner is going to own 50% of the company and get 40% of the profits. Is this allowed? Fahim says unfair. Nassim says yes. Nabil says depends. Nabil, Sheikh Nabil, obviously you are Hanafi. Okay, the answer is it depends on your madhab. Depends on your madhab. So the Malikis and the Shafi'is, they say no. And the Hanbalis, they say yes. And quite honestly, I think the Hanafis have the best answer over here, which is it depends. But the answer doesn't stop. That's not the entire answer. There's more to the answer. It's not just it depends. It depends on a very specific variable, okay? What the Hanafis are saying is if two people are investing 50% each, okay? And if one partner is a sleeping partner, let's say they don't actually do any work, they're just contributing money, that sleeping partner cannot earn more profit than their investment because they're not putting in any additional work. However, if a partner is not a sleeping partner, they're actually working. Let's say two people, me and my friend, we put 100,000 each, but he's doing all of the work. He's the one who went out and bought something. He's the one who's running the business. He's the one who set it all up. He's the one finding the customers. He's the one doing all of the work. Isn't it fair that he gets more? So the Hanafis say, yes, absolutely. So as long as you are not a sleeping partner and you are involved in the business, you should set the percentage of profit based on that, okay? So that is the Hanafi answer, and it's also compatible with the Hanbalis, but the Malikis and Shafi'is would be against this. Now, most, this is the original opinion of Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i and Imam Ahmad and Abu Hanifa. However, like nowadays, everybody pretty much follows the Hanafi opinion. Okay, Hanafis have sort of won in this regard on this particular issue. And it seems fair. It seems logical that if you're putting in more effort, then you can ask for more profit. Okay. Now, the exact amount of the profit is up to you to figure out, the partners, as long as that profit is fixed upfront. You can't come back later and say the amount of work I did was greater, pay me more. That creates conflict. So that as long as the profit is fixed upfront, this is permissible. And loss, there's a consensus that the percentages must match the investment. There's a 100% consensus on this. Nobody says, when I say match the investment, if you put in 50%, you will get 50% loss. If you put in 30%, you will take 30% of the loss. Okay? There's no disagreement on this. There's one other issue in musharaka, which is what happens if I create a company. So this is me wearing my Arab clothes. I create a company, and inside that company, I put in, I start a bank account, and inside that bank account, I put in $100. Now, the problem is, what if I try and sell that company for $90 or $110? The problem here is this would become riba. So if a company is all cash, we have to be very, very careful in how we sell that company. We can only sell it for $100. We can't sell it for 90 or 110. This issue will come up later when we talk about stocks, inshallah. Okay? There's all kinds of other rules with musharaka, but I think most of them are common sense. I'm going to move on to the next type of transaction so we can understand all of these different things and move on to real estate and stocks. Okay? So mudaraba is another type of partnership where one partner gives the money. It's called the Rabbul Mal. Another partner is the mudarib. He does the work. So one partner gives the money. The other partner does the work. The profit is shared by both. However, they're shared at an agreed upon percentage. And the rules are the same as musharaka. So the profit must be fixed up front. When I say fixed, not like fixed as in determined amount, but the profit must be determined up front, like what percentages. It cannot be fixed. So you cannot say you will get $5,000. It must be specific. It must be a percentage. It cannot be a percentage of the investment. It must be a percentage of the profit. So again, same rules as musharaka. I'm not going to repeat everything. Actually, I just did repeat everything anyway. The loss in the money is taken by the investor. Yes, Ali, the partnership must be defined in the beginning and cannot change. Or cannot change for that particular transaction or that particular company. It can change for a new contract. Right? The loss must be taken by the investor, which sounds unfair until you realize that actually the loss for the worker is their wasted time. So they also lose. They don't get the profit and they put in all the effort, so they're losing. Unless the worker is negligent. So if it's proven that they didn't do enough due diligence, then they will be liable for the loss. Okay, so this mudaraba mechanism is actually really nice. Fahim says, can both be working? It is still considered mudaraba. No, that would be musharaka. That's the difference. If both are working, if both partners are working, that is musharaka. This would be a good model for a bank, or like an Islamic bank, because what you can do is you could be the Rabbul Mal as a customer, give the money to the bank as the mudarib. The bank takes that money and they invest it, and then they take some of the profit and they give the rest of the profit back to you as a percentage. This is a good mechanism for banks to operate. Okay. The next one is murabaha, and I'm sorry for all the Arabic terminology for people who are new to this, but this will be the last one. The way that murabaha works is actually it's just a sale transaction. So murabaha is a cost plus sale, okay? And how it works is it's a type of sale where both the cost and the profit are known. So I tell you I bought this iPhone for $500. I'm selling it to you for $1,000, and then I'm charging you $50 interest or whatever. I don't have to charge the interest. That is a murabaha. We talked about that earlier. That's actually a murabaha transaction. Now, all murabaha means, generally speaking, is that the cost is known and the profit is known. However, because this has become such a popular transaction in modern finance, such a popular transaction, a lot of times, actually, let's talk about that in a second, but Murabaha allows you to either pay immediately, okay, or you can pay later. That's why, like, I can sell you the phone now and take my money later. However, like I said, the price must be fixed upfront. Price must be fixed now. The cost have to be mentioned? Yes, the cost has to be mentioned. If the cost is not mentioned, this sale is not valid. Originally, Murabaha was not a financing contract. It's just, if I'm trying to sell you something, you buy it from me. So it's not a way to go get a loan from a third party to buy something. You have to do it directly with the seller. The buyer and the seller directly have a contract. However, it's become so popular nowadays as a third-party financing contract that people translate Murabaha, instead of calling it cost plus sale. You'll find many, even Islamic finance courses and documents and websites that say it's an installment sale or a deferred payment sale. Murabaha doesn't have to be a deferred payment sale. I can pay you right now. Murabaha doesn't have to have installments. I can pay you all the money in one installment. I can pay you all of it at the end of 1 year, or I can pay all of it today. But that's how it has become a financing instrument, because what happens is, this is how it works now, okay? What happens is, instead of you just buying an iPhone from me, what happens is, nowadays, this is what people do. They say, Umar wants to sell an iPhone, and you want to buy it, but Umar wants the money now. But you don't have the money to give right now. So what do? You find another person, okay? You find that person, you say, you know what? Buy that phone from Umar, pay him $1,000 now. So buy that phone from him, and then sell me the phone immediately afterwards for $1,050, and I will pay you that $1,050 after a year. So what just happened? I'm the seller of the phone. I got $1,000 immediately for selling it. Okay. You're the buyer of the phone. You got the phone immediately because I sold it to this middle person, and the middle person sold it to you. But you only have to pay $1,050 a year from now. I wasn't willing to do that because I didn't have that kind of money. I couldn't afford it. So you went through, let's call it a bank. Let's call it an Islamic bank if you want to call it that. Right? But what happened is, this third party allowed you, even though you didn't have the money up front, to pay in installments or pay deferred, but you could still buy my phone. Okay? Now we'll get to house financing later, so we'll talk about this later. Right? All of the conditions still apply. The good must exist, and party must own it, all of these things. But Murabaha sale is not a great kind of sale. Okay? Islamically, let me just tell you, in fact, what has Mufti Taqi Uthmani said about it, who's one of the founders of modern Islamic finance and someone who's very well respected in this field. He says Murabaha should only be used as a structure of last resort for this type of three-party financing when profit and loss sharing is unavailable. Maybe as a temporary measure while we try and find better mechanisms. He also says Murabaha is a borderline transaction. There's very fine lines of distinction, very, very close to interest-bearing loan. And it's really susceptible to misuse, and that it's not an ideal way of financing. Okay? There's a lot of issues with Murabaha. In fact, Murabaha has become abused like anything. A lot of banks are abusing Murabaha. Not that there isn't a good kind of Murabaha, but a lot of banks are abusing Murabaha like anything, okay? They are, in fact, there are large businesses with safes full of platinum in Dubai, okay? They have safes full of platinum in Dubai. Why do they have platinum? Number one, platinum, if you remember the hadith of Ribā al-Fadl, I talked about gold for gold, silver for silver, dates for dates, etc. Was platinum part of that? No, platinum does not fall into one of those categories, okay? Yes, you may go for a break or something. Platinum does not fall into one of those categories. So they take safes of platinum, and what they do is, there's two businesses conducting a transaction together. One wants to buy a product. The other wants to sell a product, okay? And this bank, let's call it bank in quotes, in Dubai has a safe of platinum. What they do is they will sell the safe of platinum to one business, right? And immediately buy it back or buy it into another business. There's many ways of doing this. There's Darul, there's Bay'ul, there's many different ways of conducting this transaction. And there's ways of doing it with just like reverse murabaha. There's many different ways of doing it, right? What they will do is that safe of platinum sits in Dubai. Nobody has any use for it, but it's not gold, it's not silver, so it bypasses the requirements of the hadith. And one party immediately buys it and immediately sells it. In effect, what they've done is they've created an interest-based loan between two parties. Remember that watch that went back and forth with two contracts? That's exactly what happens. So murabaha is abused by banks. In fact, Mufti Taqi in his book, he even has all caps. He says, most essential element of transaction is that the commodity must remain in the risk of the institution. But what happens is that transaction happens quick. One transaction, second transaction, it creates exactly an interest-bearing loan. One of the journalists, John Foster, he quotes an investment banker in Islamic Finance in Dubai, and he says, this is an investment banker in Dubai who does investment banking. By the way, I'm not picking in Dubai. The same thing happens around the world, okay? I'm just telling you about the safes in Dubai. He says, we create the same type of products that we do for conventional markets. So this banker is saying, we create the same products in Islamic markets that we do for the conventional market. We then phone up a Sharia scholar to get a fatwa, okay? If he doesn't give it to us, we call another scholar. Until we find a scholar who we can pay enough money, they give us a fatwa, then we are Sharia compliant, and now we can call this product Islamic. This isn't me saying that, okay? There are billions and trillions of dollars of transaction that are moved around every year that are called Sharia compliant, Islamic financed, murabaha based transactions that are conducted like this with the intention and the purpose, the maqsad and the niyyah to create an interest-based loan. This is absolutely not halal. Okay, and even if your intention is not to do that, this transaction can have some challenges, as we will see with real estate financing. Okay, let's get into real estate financing, because this is now the meat of the presentation, okay? So how does a conventional, like if you go to Bank of America, Bank of England, I don't know what we have in England, but how does this transaction work from a conventional standpoint? You have a consumer who wants to buy, let's say, a house, and a seller of the house. The consumer is also called a borrower or purchaser, whatever they're called. They're called a borrower because they want to borrow money from the bank, right? And they're a purchaser because they're purchasing the house. Well, ideally, they would pay full price for the house, and they would get the house. But what happens is they don't have the full money, right? Most people don't have the money to buy the house. So what they do is they bring in a bank. And the bank effectively gives the consumer an interest-based loan, and then the consumer pays back in installments over multiple years. Okay. Now, it doesn't exactly work like this. There's actually like a title company, and there's escrow, and the bank actually doesn't give directly to the consumer, it passes through the title company. There's a lot of details, but effectively, this is what happens, right? The bank is giving you a loan, and you are buying a house. Okay. In this scenario, you end up paying delayed payments in installment. Usually it's like a 30-year mortgage in the US, right? Let's keep it a simple mortgage. Let's say you're buying $1 million house. Over 30 years, you might end up paying, let's say, I don't know, $1.3 million, okay? So instead of 1 million, over 30 years, you end up paying $1.3 million. And the $1 million was the principal, and the 0.3 million on top of that was the interest, or the Ribā. Okay, and we've already discussed that this is not halal, right? So I think this is a simple mortgage. This is not Islamic yet. Now let's talk about how it works from an Islamic standpoint. So Islamically, one of the types of transactions we could do, we talked about musharaka, right? Musharaka was people pooling their money together in a partnership. What you can do is you could do musharaka mutanaqisa, which is diminishing or declining co-ownership. Okay, how does this work? So the way it works is you go to a really, really good Islamic bank. A lot of people are asking for a 5-minute Maghrib break. Mufti Saab, are you okay with going a few minutes over at the end and then doing a 5-minute break for Maghrib now? Maybe we'll go just a few minutes over. Okay, inshallah. So let's do a 5-minute break for Maghrib, and we'll be back at 11:45 California time or 6:45 England time. Maghrib adhan. Yes, for those who are asking, the recording will be available after, inshallah. Okay, so Maghrib is at, a lot of people are saying Maghrib is after about 5 minutes. Let's make it a 10-minute break, inshallah. We'll be back at 11:50 California time or 6:40 London time. In the meantime, I'll take questions. So, which questions did I not answer? Rent to own, I will answer that one. Am I presenting anything? Yes, I have slides being shared. Any questions? This is a good time. Okay, so we have 10 minutes. With the 10 minutes, I'll take off-topic questions as well. So the question from Abdullah is, are 401k accounts permissible to invest in? The answer is 401k accounts inherently themselves do not have an issue. However, 401k accounts, it depends on what you are investing in. So if you're investing in stocks which are halal, then there's not a problem. If you're investing in bonds or treasuries or any interest-based securities, then that would be a problem. Also keep in mind that there is zakat on the 401k. So if you are investing in the 401k, make sure you leave enough money outside of the account so that you can pay zakat on the money that is inside the account. And I have another question. Yeah, go ahead. Question that's not directly related. Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead. Could you recommend some stocks for investment? I will not recommend stocks. That's a different seminar. I will not recommend stocks for investment. As in like specific stocks, I will not recommend them. I will tell you that the efficient frontier or the market theory of portfolio basically teaches us that it is best to invest in as many things as possible at the same time. So from just the smartest financial thing you could do personally is to invest in as many stocks as you could at the same time. And the way to usually achieve that is through baskets of stocks, like ETFs usually. And so, for example, there's an ETF called HLAL, halal. Okay, so that takes the S&P 500 in the US, which is represented either through like VTI or QQQ or different ETFs, and it takes all of those stocks and it puts them through a screener to find the halal ones, and then only invests in those. And over the long run, finance theory says you will do better investing in that than you will in individual stocks. Now, if you're really, really good at picking individual stocks, you might do better that way. Does the same principle apply to traditional savings accounts? Yes, the same principle applies to savings accounts. So if you have a savings account that's earning interest, that is considered Ribā. If you have a savings account that is transferred into a CD, a certificate of deposit, or transferred into a sweep of some sort, that is considered Ribā as well. If you have a savings account that somehow picks up your money and puts it in equity, I don't know of any savings account that does that, that would be considered permissible. Another question came up earlier about Islamic banks. And if Islamic banks, they offer certain types of savings accounts and certificates of deposit. I think University Islamic is one of them, maybe Diwan Bank. I'm not sure if Whittier Bank does. There's a few different banks that do, at least conventional banks that offer savings accounts, and also like Mizan Bank and some of the other like halal options or the Sharia compliant options. I will tell you the principles that I'm sharing, some of the banks apply these principles well and some of them do not. And so some of those accounts will be considered permissible and some of them are not. Someone asked about student loans. Student loans it is someone in need. And if you are giving them a loan, that is not an investment. Yes, you can use the words, I'm investing in a person. That's what you're doing, is you're meeting someone's needs. So if you want to give someone a student loan, you can give it to them interest-free, or you can give it to them as a gift. But to give someone a student loan and then ask for something in return, Islamically speaking, that would be considered riba and haram. Now, the question becomes, can you take a student loan? So that's a different question. Because the first question is, can you give a student loan and charge interest? There's absolutely no excuse for that. Can you take a student loan and pay interest on that? So the answer is, the scholars the contemporary scholars have a range of opinions on this. Most of them say you should exhaust every means possible to not have to take a student loan. See if you can work while you're going to school. See if you can borrow money from your family, relatives, friends, somewhere, anywhere. See if you can get good grades and apply for scholarships and awards and grants. And if all of those things fail, some of the scholars have allowed student loans because of need, because they consider a college degree to be something that is needed by people in order to do well in our countries, in the Western countries specifically. And so they have allowed for student loans. Is it allowed to take money from the government because of the coronavirus? As an example, if they give you $100,000 in a business loan, for example, and they say pay it back in 2 years, if you're not able to pay it back, then if you're not able to pay it back, then you have to pay interest. Yes, taking an interest-free loan is absolutely permissible, but you must pay it by the due date. So, for example, if you go to an electronics store and they say you can buy this laptop for $1,000, interest-free, 2 years, pay no interest, as long as you pay us anytime within the next 2 years. After that, there will be an interest charge. In that case, if you take that laptop and you pay that loan within 2 years, no problem. Do not let it go over the 2 years. That would become riba. That would become haram. The question Sheikh Mustafa was asking, do those scholars who allow student loans then allow madrasa loans, since that's more of a need than an English degree? The scholars that allow for it, and again, this is definitely a big issue of debate amongst modern scholars. The scholars that allow for it won't allow for it for you to get a frivolous degree. Well, let me just go get a degree in English, and then I don't actually care about English, and I'm not going to teach English, I'm just going to go study English. In that case, that loan is not necessary in the first place, so they don't allow it for that reason. But if you say, yes, I will get an English degree, and then I will use that to go teach in a high school, and that is the way that I will earn my money, then, in that case, those scholars would allow it. Do they allow it for madrasa loans? I don't know. I haven't specifically asked those people that question. I would assume that if the madrasa degree is becoming a means for you to earn, I don't know. I don't actually know the answer to that question. Are credit card balance transfer charges considered riba? Yes, they are. Earning rewards points from credit cards, people have allowed, but paying any interest is not allowed. Okay, in 1 more minute, we'll start the class back up. So if there's any more questions, please ask now. And if not, I think my goal is to try and finish My goal is to try and finish by about 15 minutes late. So maybe 25 minutes from now. Inshallah. What are some of the US Islamic banks that follow the guidelines correctly? So for house purchase, there's an organization called Amin Housing Cooperative in the Bay Area. They do a fairly decent job of following a musharaka, diminishing musharaka. Most banks, I tend to find some sort of issue, so but I'm not going to give any fatwas on banks. Okay, let's get moving with the class again. So, okay, we talked about the conventional mortgage. Now we're at musharaka mutanaqisat. So the way that this works is the customer comes in, wants to buy the house, brings in an Islamic bank or a friend, whatever it is. Basically, it's someone who has the money. What they decide to do is form a musharaka, form a partnership. Okay? So they build a company together. And what they do with this company is they both put money in this company. So it could be 50-50, it could be 90-10, whatever it is, they decide to put in their combined money and build a musharaka partnership over there. Okay? And then they buy the house. So now this customer who only had 10% of the money to buy the house, by the way, you can call him a customer, but at this point, I would call him a partner, okay? Because him and the bank, they are now in a true partnership, okay? They have formed a musharaka. He's not just a customer, he's actually a partner with the bank. So let's say the customer put in 10% of the money, the bank paid the other 90%, and they buy the house together, and now their ownership is 10% and 90%, okay? So this is now a musharaka. And what happens over time, and I think most of you might have heard of this concept of declining or diminishing musharaka, is you make an agreement that, after some period of time, so what's going to happen is, let's say this person wants to live in the house, actually, let's leave that for now. Let's say what happens is this person actually wants to buy the house over time. So what they do is they buy 10% now, and 90% is owned by the bank. And on the 90%, they will pay the bank a rent. A real rent. So they go out, they get a market appraisal to find out what the rent is, and they pay the rent, okay? And after a little while they're paying rent, they also decide to pay a little bit more money, and now they own 20% of the house, and the bank owns 80%. And after a little bit, they own 30% of the house, and then 40% of the house. And so they keep buying more and more of the house, and the bank owns less and less of the house over time. The amount that the person owns themselves, they don't pay any rent, but the amount that the bank owns, they pay a rent. Okay, so every month they pay a little bit for the rent, and they pay a little bit for buying more of the house. Okay, and over time they own 100% of the house. So there's actually three parts to this. The first one was forming the musharaka to buy the house. The second one is the rental contract, that you pay rent on the amount that you don't own. And the third one is that you buy more and more of the house every month. Okay. And the first question that comes up is, well, didn't we say that we shouldn't try and mix two contracts? The Prophet said, "Safqatain fi safqatin wahida" is like prohibited, right? The two contracts in one contract is prohibited. So why are we merging all these contracts together? So finance is interesting, right? This is why we go back to Ribā. Why was Ribā prohibited? We go back to al-aslu fil ashya'i al-ibaha, like the original is permissibility. We have to go back and look at all of those details and bring them together and say, look, what are we accomplishing through this contract? Are we meeting the objectives of why Ribā is prohibited or not? The question is this model used by all of the Islamic banks? No, this model is used by some of the Islamic banks. So I'm sure some people have the questions like, okay, we called it musharaka, we stipulated a rent, and we're doing this rent to own model, but like, it's not rent to own. To be clear, you are not paying a rent, and that rent is not contributing towards buying the house. There's two separate things. You're paying a rent, and you're paying for ownership. So the question becomes, isn't this like really kind of the same as the conventional mortgage? Does anyone have this question? I'm calling it diminishing musharaka. I'm saying this is a partnership and it's Islamic. But in the end, that $1 million house that I spent $1.3 million for in the conventional mortgage, I'm spending $1.3 million maybe in musharaka. Maybe I'm spending even more than that. Maybe I'm spending $1.4 million. And yeah, what if the rate is exactly the same as the interest rate? Or what if it's because Islamic banks, they require Sharia scholars, they require special setup, so they have to charge a little bit more. Maybe like it's even 0.25% or 0.5% higher than the standard interest rate. So what's the point? What's the point of the diminishing musharaka if it feels the same as a conventional mortgage? Now, nobody leave the class right now, okay? I don't want you to walk away with that message. Nobody's allowed to leave the class. It's very important that you hear the rest of the conversation. The question is, what's different? What is different about the diminishing musharaka as compared to the bank just doing a conventional loan? Okay. Number one, the question Sheikh Nabil asked this partnership is void of any loaning. Yes, there's no loaning going on. There's no interest. But the question is, it feels like I still spent $1.4 million. So number one, in a diminishing musharaka, who pays for a kitchen remodel? Who pays for when a washing machine or fridge goes bad? Who pays for the taxes, the property taxes? And who pays for the insurance, if the insurance is halal, which we're not going to get into today? Who pays for all of these things? The answer, let's go back, right? This was a partnership between the customer and the bank. Customer and the bank. These two are partners, and at some point, customer owned 10%, bank owned 90%, and then it became 20/80 and so on, right? Who pays for it? The answer is, in musharaka, the customer pays. No, that's not the right answer. I'm just reading what people are saying. It should be divided. Thank you, Fahim. It should be divided exactly the same way. Both of them will pay. So if the customer owns 10% of the house, the customer will pay 10% of the repairs, 10% of the insurance, 10% of the taxes. The bank will pay 90% of the insurance, 90% of the taxes, 90% of the repairs. Okay, that is how diminishing musharaka works. You see how that's better than a conventional mortgage? You see why that's better? Because now we're sharing the responsibility of the insurance and the repairs. Number two, who profits and loses? So we said the way this transaction works is we start off with maybe the customer only 10% of the house, right? Now, what happens? Let's say it's a 30-year partnership. 30-year partnership, right? And 5 years into it or 10 years into it, you decide you want to sell the house. It was $1 million house, right? And 5-10 years into it, you decide you sell the house. In this situation, both the customer and the bank are going to make money or lose money. So if $1 million house now became, as real estate prices went crazy in like London and California and other places, that $1 million house now became $1.5 million after like this 10 years, right? This is not abnormal. That 5 million, this is after 10 years. So let's say by this point, the customer owns, I don't know, like 40% of the house or something. They will get 40% of the profits that were made. Okay, so they will get $200,000 and the bank will get the other $300,000. So there is sharing going on of the profit and the loss. In the conventional mortgage, only the customer benefited from the profit and the loss. Okay, this is very, very different. Who loses money in case there's a natural disaster? You know, people tend to insure things nowadays, but what if it's not insured? There's an earthquake, a flood, fire, deductible. Who pays for that? Both of them pay based on their percentage ownership. Okay. What happens if you can't pay? In a conventional mortgage, I have a 30-year loan, which was for $1 million house, which over the years, I'm going to pay $1.3 million, right? Over 30 years, I'm going to pay $1.3 million. If I'm in year 29, Okay. This is year 29, and I lose my job, and I can't make my payments. I've already paid the bank $1.26 million, something like that. I've paid them a lot of money, and now I can't make payments anymore. What does the bank do? In a conventional mortgage, in a debt-based scenario, the bank will come in, they will buy the house, okay? Sorry, they will not buy the house. They will snatch the house. They will seize the house. They will take the house away. They will kick me out of the house legally. They will sell the house. Maybe they'll sell it for 1.5 million because the price has gone up, or 1.8 million, whatever. They will sell the house, and what will they give back to me? Absolutely nothing. So year 29, I've already paid the bank 1.2 something million dollars. Okay, I've spent all of this money, and now all the bank does is it takes the house and it gives me nothing back. Absolutely nothing. They keep all of the money. And in a diminishing musharaka program, what happens is the bank will take the house. Actually, they will still try and work with me, but if they can't, they will take the house. They will sell the house, and they will give me whatever my share. So if I owned by that point like 90% of the house, right, I will get 1 point some million dollars, and they will get a little bit of money themselves. Okay, so it's a big difference between conventional mortgage and musharaka. Question Sheikh Shadman is asking, how would the bank profit from the appreciation? The selling price was determined already, right? No, the selling price is not determined already. The selling price is determined based on the market rate. Abdullah, if you bought a house from someone and they're an Islamic, so whether they're called Islamic, they're Islamic, whatever, and then they take that transaction and they sell the loan to Freddie Mac, Islamically speaking, you don't need to worry about that because your transaction with the bank is halal. If they go back and do something else with it, you don't need to worry about that. So, for example, when we conduct business, the Prophet ﷺ, he did business, right? He did business with the Jews, he did business with the mushrikeen, he did business with people of all religions, and even did mortgages. When I say mortgage, like the word mortgage means the concept of giving something as mortgage. He even had a mortgage with a Jew. So he conducted business transactions, not any interest based or anything like that. He conducted transactions with non-Muslims, and he knew that they were using the money in the back end to do things like giving it on interest-based loans and whatever. Yet he conducted those transactions. So our transactions are with the party that we are working with, and we are not liable if they go in the back end and then do something else with it. Okay? We have to make sure our transaction is halal. So this is a concept of how a diminishing musharaka operates, and it's actually extremely different because the results that are achieved, the results that are achieved are that we have fairness and justice. When money is lost, the bank loses money and the customer loses money. When money is gained, the bank gains money and the customer gains money. And it is based on the percentages that they have put in to the percentage ownership that they have of the house. Okay? So basically what Islam is teaching us is how to establish a fair, just, and equal partnership system, and a diminishing musharaka allows us to do that. Okay, alhamdulillah. How about a murabaha-based house financing? This is actually one of the most popular house financing schemes today. So if you remember, murabaha was the cost plus sale, where I was selling you my iPhone, and you were giving me $1,050 a year from now. Now, again, this transaction is fine between two parties. I personally have a lot of issues with it when it involves three parties, because here's what happens. Okay, number one, what you really want. So let me explain. So this is the customer. Let's say it's me wearing my Arab clothes again. Here's the bank, the Islamic bank, doing murabaha-based financing, and here is the seller of the house. This one in orange is the seller of the house. Okay, and the seller doesn't care how they get the money; they just want to get the money for the house. So, $1 million house, seller wants $1 million. So the way this works is the bank takes $1 million, gives it to the seller. Seller gives them the house. The bank buys the house. Okay. The bank buys the house. This isn't the bank giving you a loan. Let's be clear. The bank actually buys the house. And then the bank sells you the house and you pay them back, whatever, 1.3 million, 1.4 million, whatever it was over that 30 years in installments. Okay? So this is murabaha-based financing with deferred payment and 3 parties involved. Does everyone understand how this works? The bank bought the house, and then they sold you the house, and you pay them deferred over the years. Okay. There's no renting. There's no like buying portions. There's no like diminishing, nothing. It's just they bought the house. They immediately sell you the house. Now, effectively, what do you have? A loan to the bank for 1.4 million, and you got the house, right? So let's talk about this, and we'll get to the previous slide as well, right? we'll get to the previous slide as well. But here's the issue, okay? If I'm selling you a phone, I already own the phone, and I sell you a phone and I charge you $1,050 for it, I fundamentally don't have an issue with that. But here's what happens, okay? What really happens is the customer goes to the bank, says, I would like to buy a house. Bank says, about how much are you looking to spend on the house? Customer says, about $1 million. Bank says, okay, let me check your credit. Okay, looks good. Let's sign like a few different contracts, or one contract with a bunch of conditions. Basically, firstly, we're going to make you an agent of the bank. Okay, we're going to make you an agent of the bank through contract. Then we want you to go out and find a house for yourself and buy it for us. So go find a house that you like, that you would like to purchase, but buy it for us, and promise to us that when we buy it from the seller, you will buy it from us. Okay, so first find it, then make a promise that when we buy it from the seller, you will also buy it from us, so that we're not stuck with the house, because we don't really want the house. We don't want the house. We just want to sell you the house. And we don't care what house it is. We just see in the musharaka. If you're getting a musharaka, if you're the bank, do you care about what house it is? The last transaction we just did, do you care about the house? Like, do you want to buy it in a nice school district? To have the house price go up? You want to make sure it's not, at a part of the beach where it's going to get washed away in a landslide or something like that. Do you care in a musharaka? What kind of house? The previous transaction we talked about. Yes, you care. The reason you care is because if you lose money on that house, if the value of the house goes down, you lose money. You see how the incentives align? How Islam is trying to make everyone go after the same goodness, right? Everybody cares about the price of the house. Everybody wants to make sure the house is not destroyed. Everybody wants to make sure there's profit and loss. Now, we're in murabaha, right? Does the bank care about the house? The bank could care less about the house. Because as soon as you buy the house, they're going to flip it over to you. So they don't care if the price goes up or down. That's not their problem. This is like any other bank, okay? This is like any conventional bank. They don't care. Now, Islamically, can you actually make someone make a promise that's enforceable in the court of law? Can you say, like, make me a promise that you will buy this house, and if you don't buy this house, I will take you to court and sue you and make you pay me? It turns out, Islamically, most of the madhahib don't allow for this. We're not talking about a contractual condition. We're talking about a promise. A promise is enforceable. Like, of course, you'll be accountable on the day of judgment. Allah will hold you accountable. But in the court of law, this is not something that is enforceable. However, there's a Maliki opinion mentioned in Al-Furuq, which actually allows you to make a promise if there's an actual loss that happens. So in this case, the bank could claim, I got stuck with a house, and so I'm losing money. And so that's why banks will often use that minority opinion and put that promise into the contract. So they make you become the agent, they make you commit that promise, which is usually not from any of the madhahib, except for sort of like a smaller opinion in the Maliki madhab. Nothing against the Maliki madhab, it's a beautiful madhab. I'm just saying that Hanafis will do this, Shafis will do this, everyone will do this because they just want to make this work. Right? And then what happens is the way that the transaction is conducted, the bank buys the house, and within 5 minutes or within 5 seconds, they flip it over to you. So they take no risk of owning the house. The whole idea behind Murabaha is that if you own a product, you're taking some risk, but no, they just flip it over. So what you're left with is effectively, it's like the watch, right? You got a $1.4 million loan from the bank, and you got the house from the seller, and the seller got the $1 million payment. Effectively. Now, I'm not going to say Murabaha is haram. The reason I can't say it's haram is because a lot of the banks practice this, and they do it exactly this way. Okay? But here's what I want you to think about. What happens if you can't pay the money? What happens? Who pays for major repairs, taxes, and insurance? And who profits and who loses? Now, a lot of the Islamic banks, by the way, on the first one, they will actually, if you can't pay, they will work with you and they will sell the house and give you the part that you don't owe them. Okay? So that part is usually not a problem. But they are absolutely not sharing in repairs. They're not sharing in taxes. They're not sharing in insurance. If you make or lose money, you are the only one doing it. So it is very similar to a conventional mortgage, okay? This is the problem with Murabaha. Again, a lot of banks now use this, but there are some concerns. So my question to you becomes, are we meeting the objectives of the Sharia? Are we actually meeting al-umur bi maqasidiha? Are we doing innamal a'malu binniyat? Are we doing, and especially when we find all the loopholes. You know what? Murabaha can actually be a fine transaction. There's like some scholars who've done like research on Murabaha said there's 47 conditions to Murabaha. There should not be a promise involved. You should not be an agent of the person making the first purchase. Blah, blah. They put all of these conditions. If you actually follow those conditions, Murabaha wouldn't be an issue. If you actually followed all of the conditions that are outlined, it wouldn't be an issue. But because we take a contract, which Mufti Taqi said was what? Like a slippery slope or at the limits, right? It's like right there. And then now we add to it, let's make that purchase the flip. Bank buys the house, instantly flips it. Let's make it so that you're the agent. All of these different details that get thrown in there make it a big issue. Okay. Yeah, we talked about this. The last one is Ijara-based financing, and then we'll end with stocks. So Ijara-based financing is basically rent to own. So I can't even, let me just put it this way. I don't have a detailed slide on it, but the way that Ijara-based house financing. So number one, Ijara wasn't an issue. I said that at the beginning. If I'm renting a car, if I'm renting a house, right, that is not a problem. If I'm just renting something, it's not a problem. With Ijara-based house financing, it's called rent to own, okay? And what happens with rent to own is you sign a couple of contracts. You say, you know what, I will pay you rent for 30 years. Like I'm renting the house normally. And then at the end of the contract, let's sign another contract that says, you will give me the house as a gift, just for free. Or you will give me the house for, $1. Some token money. It's not free. Just give it to me for $1 because you can charge anything you want. What are you really trying to achieve? If you were a landlord of a house and you were getting a standard rental income every month from someone who's renting for 30 years, at the end of the 30 years, would you say, this person renting from me, they paid me rent for 30 years. Let me just give them the house. Let me just give it to them for free. Would you do that? The house is worth more than $1 million. You wouldn't just give it away, right? So the Ijara-based finance basically contracts, the way they work is there are two contracts in one. One is a rental contract, and one is either a gift or an exchange of some sort. And you end up with all of the same issues. So who benefits from profit and loss, all of that stuff. all of that ends up falling on the customer. So they are very, very tricky. And in fact, most of the scholars do not like most of the ijara-based contracts at all. So this one is probably one of the worst contracts to engage in. Okay. Okay, let's end with stocks and stock screens, and then we can do any questions that people may have, but I want to get this finished. So a couple of terms I want people to know. Book value, market value. Actually, let's just skip that. We can avoid that. I want people to know that revenue equals sales. And something that a lot of people get confused by when we ask this question. I bought the phone, the iPhone, for 500, and I sold it for 1,000, right? I bought it for 500, sold for 1,000. What is my earnings? I bought a phone for 500 and I sold it for 1,000. What is my earnings? Iftar group. I bought for 500, sold for 1,000. What's my earnings? Okay, most people are saying 500. Good. A lot of times I ask people the question, they say earnings is 1,000. No, earnings is not the revenue. Earnings is the same as your profit or the return or the income. Okay. So this is important to know when we're looking at financial statements, which we need to look at for figuring out if a stock is halal or not. Okay, so how do we know if a stock is halal and can we invest in it? Number one, if we're investing in a company, we shouldn't invest in a riba or debt-based securities. We can't do bonds. We can't do commercial bonds or even government bonds. We have to do it through stocks because it has to be an equity-based investment. But the first thing that we look at is the nature of the business. Is it halal or not? We already discussed this, right? So the scholars have said no alcohol, no tobacco, no pork, no pornography, no music, no gambling. We know this one. So obviously we cannot invest in businesses that are haram when of themselves. Right? Okay. Number two, obviously the business should not deal with riba. We already said riba is bad. So the business should not deal with riba. Number three, we talked about liquidity just really quickly. We said, look, what if the business is just cash? Like if I form a company and I create a $100 bank account in there, can I sell that for $110? No, because it's $100 for $110, money for money. That becomes riba. So the business cannot be too much cash. Because if it's, otherwise I'm trying to play games. I might say, let me put $99 in a bank account and put like $1 worth of, I don't know, this glass, right? So I take $1, maybe it's more than a dollar. So I put $1 for the glass, $99 of cash, and then I form a company and I sell it for 110. That's me trying to cheat the system again, right? Always trying to trick the system. Liquid. So liquidity in finance means it's like cash, or it's almost cash. So check is like almost like a cash. Certain types of things that are like almost cash, or they can very quickly be converted into cash. Okay. So a house is not considered liquid because a house is something that takes a while to sell. A factory is not liquid. So things like cash and things that can easily be converted into cash. Okay. So the problem that happens here is I think these are basically the three conditions. And I would add a fourth condition. And the fourth condition is when you're investing in a stock, don't just make sure it's halal. Don't just make sure it's not doing riba. Don't just make sure that it's not too liquid, but also make sure it's a good investment. Maybe that one's obvious, but Islamically, don't be stupid. Like we learned this concept of being wise with our money, and you will be questioned for every penny that you've earned, and every penny that you spend. And so if you're being stupid in your investment, then you're either gambling or not thinking about it properly, and that's going to be an issue. So I would add the condition, we don't do this in the stock screens, but I would add the condition of make sure it's a smart investment. You've done some level of due diligence to make sure that it's a good stock. Okay. So the problem that happens is it's hard to find a 100% halal stock, right? Because every business, by the way, this is my last slide in case you're wondering how much longer we're going to go. This is my last slide. And we'll end with this, inshallah, and maybe do some extended Q&A. So those are the people that are trying to invest. Say, look, even if I buy a good company, like iPhones, I like iPhones, I use a MacBook. What if I want to invest in Apple? Apple still has iTunes, and they have movies and music and all this other stuff. What if I like, I don't know, Walgreens or something, but they sell alcohol in there? What if I like, a lot of companies have some level of haram in it. So what do? How much haramness would be considered permissible, right? So in the early 90s, the scholars got together and talked about this and came up with some good concepts. So Mufti Taqi Usmani, Sheikh Yusuf Tanaldi Lorenzo, one of my teachers, Sheikh Abdul Sattar Abu Nizami Yaqubi. These are some of the big scholars of finance in the world. They came up with what's now known as the Dow Jones Fatwa. And the Dow Jones Fatwa later developed into the IOFI standard. So IOFI is like this organization that governs Islamic financial contracts and standards and best practices and accounting standards. And this has now been adopted by pretty much every fiqh council, European Fiqh Council, North American Fiqh Council, AMJA, American Muslim Jurist Association. All of the councils have adopted pretty much these standards, whether it's in the Middle East, in the West, and they have established the standard for how much haramness can you have. Okay, now it sounds kind of bad as when I phrase it that way, but can you have a little bit of haram? Is that okay? Okay. So the answer that they came up with in the Dow Jones Fatwa is what they said was, let's minimize the haram as much as we can. And if a little bit remains, let's try and cleanse it. So for example, if I know a company is doing 99% halal business and they have 1% haram, let me invest in that company and then take 1% of my profits and give that away to charity to cleanse my wealth. Okay, so this is the basic concept, and the justifications are many. Mufti Taqi talks about it in his Introduction to Islamic Finance book. He says, I quote him, the Islamic investor or a shareholder in the company is not a direct party to the haram. So you have very little control over the haram. If you're investing in a stock, right? So he says this is owing to the nature of the company structure. As a shareholder in a corporation and not a full partner in a simple partnership, the shareholder has to vote through proxy. For those of you who invest in shares, you know that there's a proxy voting where the shareholders get to vote on some things. And they try and make their disapproval of the haram activities known, right? However, if the Muslim shareholder is outvoted, then he can't be held responsible for the vote. So he isn't trying to justify and say, you know what, go for all haram. What he's saying is, if there's a little bit of haram and you're speaking against it and you're trying to not to invest in it and you cleanse the wealth, then that might be considered okay. And then he says also there should be no or little ambiguity considering the primary business that this company is involved with, right? So primarily the business has to be a halal business, okay? And only a negligible portion of the business can be haram. We'll talk about what that means. And then he says, many Islamic investors, this is his justification, many Islamic investors have modest savings, and if we did not allow for them to invest, right? If we did not allow for them to invest, then we would not have advancements in society, we would not have medical advances, we would not have technology, consumer products, services, and even if these investments contain a little bit of haram, then a Muslim should take steps to purify that haram, or we should allow that Muslim to invest. And this is based on a variety of different fiqh principles. We have al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir, that hardship begets ease. So if something becomes really hard, we make small allowances for it to allow for ease. Or ad-daruratu tuhibbu al-mahzurat, that necessity renders prohibited things permissible. So necessity can make something prohibited permissible within certain limits and conditions and constraints. And so based on these principles, what percent is negligible? That's the question that's being asked, and I will answer that, which is less than 5% of the revenue is what the scholars decided should come from halal sources, okay? So if you have a restaurant or a hotel and it's getting a little bit of money from alcohol, for example, then it might be okay to invest in there, because as long as that revenue is less than 50%, the haram revenue, okay? So that's for the first bullet point. The second one, how do we figure out that the business is not dealing, sorry, did I say 15%? I meant 5%. Okay. I said 15, that was an accident. Okay. How do we make sure the business is not dealing with riba? Because we know we can't pay or receive interest, right? So number one, they said the debt to market ratio, the debt to market value ratio should be less than 33%. So what's the debt to market value ratio, and why does that matter? The market value of a company is the total value of the company, what the company would sell for. So if I had ice cream shop, and if I put it in the market and people are willing to pay $1 million for it, then that ice cream shop has a market value of $1 million. When we're dealing with stocks or shares, we take all of the shares of the company, multiply it by the share price, and that's usually the market value of the company. Usually, there's caveats, so don't just do that. If you go to Yahoo Finance or Google, look up market cap or market value, that will tell you the market value of the company. Why are they saying the debt, the net worth of the company? The net worth from a market value standpoint, not a book value standpoint. So why are they saying the debt to market ratio, and why are they saying 1/3? What they're saying is, if the whole value of the market, whole value of the company, if you take that value and more than 1/3 of it is invested in, has debt-based investors, right? Like we had that earlier we had the equity investor, the debt investor investing in the pharmaceutical company for the coronavirus vaccine, right? So if the debt person owned more than 33% of the company, we can't invest in this company. Why? Because now that company is paying too much riba, and we would be part of a partnership where we are paying too much riba. Does that make sense? We don't want to be part of a partnership that's paying too much riba. So why 33% though? That's the next question. And even many people don't know the answer to this. Where did we get 33%? Anyone know? Okay, why is this percent more than 30? The reason we came with 33%, the reason that the scholars came up with 33% was a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, in which Sa'ad approached the Prophet ﷺ, and he asked about giving wasiyah. Okay, he asked about giving wasiyah, in bequesting, basically. Sorry, I'm just watching the timing here. So Sa'ad came to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ told him, and he said, "As-thulusu was-thulusu kathir." He said, how much can you leave behind for your heirs as a part of your will? And the Prophet ﷺ said, "As-thulus," which means 1/3, was-thulusu kathir. Was-thulusu kathir, meaning that 1/3 is plenty or abundant. So we're trying to avoid being plenty of riba or abundance of riba. Now, this isn't saying we're 33% of the profits are going to riba, or 33% of the revenues are going to riba. If 33% of the revenue is going to coming from riba, that would clearly fall into the first category. It would be haram, clearly. We're saying 1/3 of the partners, like we're partnering with someone and we're partnering with debt-based people, and some interest will have to be paid for that. Okay. Now, this value for a company may keep changing over time. So what they generally look at is the last 12 months averaged out. By the way, let's be clear. This is not for your own business. You can't go out and say, I'm going to form a business and get 33% of my investment from debt-based investors, or I'm going to be a 33% debt-based investor. Absolutely not. This is because we don't have control over it, and we're trying to do the best that we can. So there's some allowance has been made for this when you're investing in a stock. Okay. The question Dr. Nasreen is asking is, the hadith was about wasiyah. So she's asking, the hadith is about wasiyah. Why are we applying it to the business? And what I can tell you is, some of these problems that we're dealing with today, we don't know what to equate them to. And so the scholars find ways, they find ways of doing qiyas, they find ways of doing analogy, so that we can compare to something. What we don't want is the abundance or preponderance of the company. I should say abundance, not a preponderance. Abundance of the company to come from riba-based financing. And so they came up with the rule of as-thuluth was-thuluthu kathir. Okay, some people say 30%, just to be safe. Some of the screens you find out there, they'll say 30%. The idea is 1/3, okay? The other thing that they say is the cash and equivalence. Equivalence meaning something that's like cash that you can quickly convert to cash should be, within the company, should be less than 33%. Because the first bullet point said we shouldn't be paying riba. The second one, cash and equivalence, is saying we shouldn't be consuming riba. So if we have a lot of cash, we're not talking about our Muslim companies again, we're talking about like Apple and all these other companies. If they have a lot of cash, they're generally earning interest on it. We want to minimize that earning So if the company has more than 33% cash, then we want to avoid investing in that company. Okay. And the third rule is that the accounts receivable should be less than 45% of the total assets. Okay. First question, what's accounts receivable? Second question, where did we get 45%? Okay. So number one, accounts receivable. This is how businesses work today. Okay. Now, every time this is how business to business transactions work. In fact, this is how consumer to business transactions work too, but definitely business to business. If one business buys a product from another business, they don't pay right away. Okay, this is not how it's normally done. Usually you say, I will pay you later, because it's too inconvenient. Deliver the product, give me the cash right away. No, usually the cash and the product are not done at the same time, and usually the cash follows later. And usually follows, 3 months, maybe 6 months, maybe 90 days, 120 days. There's different rules for this. It's negotiated between the two businesses. And oftentimes, there's interest charged for that. So oftentimes, the business will say, I will pay you later, charge me 1.5%, 2%. It's a nominal amount of interest. Just charge me that, because I'd rather hold on to the cash, because cash is king, and I can invest that cash in my products and my services and other things. I will make more than enough money. I will pay your interest, and I will pay more than that. So accounts receivables are those accounts. It shows up on the balance sheet of a company. This is basically money that another business or someone else owes you. So if what they owe you is a very large amount, then you are going to be making too much interest on it. Why 45%? The basic idea is to be careful. It's actually like 50%. The basic idea is, and this comes in, we study this concept in fiqh, where we say, for example, can you touch a mushaf, a Quran, if you don't have wudu? Right? We've all heard of maybe this concept of, can you touch a Quran without wudu? And the four madhahib all agree, Shafi'is, Hanbalis, Malikis, and Hanafis all agree that you cannot. However, if the question becomes, what is a Quran? What is a Quran? And what the scholars say is, if it's more than 50% non-Quran, like it has translation, tafsir, other things, then you can hold it without wudu, right? So we use this 50% rule. Similarly, we say, if you're doing masah, you have to use 3 fingers, because that's more than 50% of your hand. If you're doing tawaf, there's different rules if you've done 3 rounds or 4 rounds, because 4 rounds becomes more than 50% of the tawaf. Okay, so this is the juristic principle. And based on this, they came up with 50%. And to be safe, they subtracted 5. So that's how we got 45%. Okay. And then the last thing, and some people are asking if they can leave. And yes, you can leave. I'm on the last point here. So the basic concept is, we learn from the books of fiqh. We learn لأن القليل مستهلك في الكثير, that if you have something less, then it's like kind of like overpowered by, or the ruling of the more is what happens here. I took this wording from Ikhtiyar, which is a book of Hanafi fiqh, but this wording is something that we're used to from many books of fiqh, and this is the principle that's applied. So the last one is that the business shouldn't be too liquid. Many investors actually don't screen for this, or if they do, they just make sure that the illiquid assets are not more than 33%, which is similar to cash and equivalents being less than 33%, so it doesn't usually apply. Now, these formulas are generally what's used by the fiqh councils, the mutual funds, the Amana Fund, Azad Fund, Iman Fund, Islamic indexes, Wahid Invest, like everybody pretty much uses these rules. And yes, you can critique them. The numbers, you can argue why 33% here, why not 45, why not 45, why is this number? And we can say this is the scholars' ijtihad. This is the effort that they've put in, and these are people who've put in a lot of effort, and so we generally follow these rules, but we understand that this is human effort, and there's some room there for a little bit of mistake here and there. So like, if maybe like a particular business we're investing in, maybe it matches all of these ratios, but if it's really hitting 33% on one and 33% on the other and 45, we should be very, very careful with that, right? It's too many numbers it's hitting. So these are just general guidelines that help us pick the right stocks. And this is probably the best that we can do, because the amount of haram out there is preponderant, and it's very difficult to escape it. And there's applications available like Zoya and many, many others that help us go through stocks and figure out if they map to these screens or not. And with that, hopefully with the real estate, we're able to take some of those concepts, apply them to other types of assets and businesses. And same thing with the stocks. If we could do this for stocks, we could do this for mutual funds, ETFs, 401ks, anything else. So hopefully we've learned from these concepts. And if there's any questions, I will answer them now, inshallah. My apologies for going over. Recording will be made available for anyone. Is it permissible to buy Amazon stock? I believe as per the screen, it's fine, but I haven't run a screen on it recently. From what I'm aware of Amazon, I believe it matches the screens, but you can double check by looking at its balance sheet. So, does Amana Mutual Funds follow these rules? Yes, Amana Mutual Fund does follow these rules. One question is, what advice can we give to younger generation on investing do's and don'ts? Lots of people can probably write from prescribers aloud. I would really appreciate if you could summarize shortly what Muslims should look for in investment opportunities. Again, so I did explain this is not an investment seminar, and so I won't delve into details. That could be a separate seminar, inshallah. But I think it's your question is valuable. And so, number one, Islam encourages investment. It doesn't really want money to sit around. It's okay to leave some money for like emergency funds, things like that. But you should invest. If you're not investing, you're losing money. And you're losing money, number one, through inflation. Just from a pure money standpoint, you're losing money through inflation. And also, you're going to pay zakat on it. So the money will just decrease over time. Right? So the money will physically decrease over time. Also, that's not what Islam wants you to do. So more importantly, the money should be put to use. So number one, you should invest your money. The question becomes, where do you invest your money? There's actually many, many Islamic vehicles available for investment now. There's now ETFs, exchange traded funds available, things like HLAL, halal. There are mutual funds that do, for those that are active in the field of finance, that seek alpha, they do active trading, Amana, Azad, Iman. They're available. There are businesses, there are real estate funds. So I know in the Bay Area, there's Cordoba funds. They pool money from multiple people, and they pool it together, and they buy houses, and they put those houses on rent, and then they pay the people. It's a musharaka system, so people share in the rent, and then when they sell the houses, everyone shares in the profit. I know in Southern California, there's a company called Income Booster. You put money in there, and then they buy houses on great prices, and then they upgrade them and they flip them, and whatever money you make, that's yours to keep as musharaka as well. So there's many, many Muslim businesses that we may not be aware of, but we should try and find these opportunities where we have halal businesses we can invest in, and of course halal stocks as well. Is it permissible to invest in and buy and let properties? Yes, you may buy a house and you may rent it out. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as the way that you purchased it, it was based on a halal financing. So either you bought it on cash or you bought it through one of the permissible means of financing. What about investing in gold as a platform? So, you know, we should go into Julius, we should do the first this. Investing in gold. So number one, conventionally, it's not really considered investing in gold. It's considered putting money into gold. It's like money in a way. Gold is treated like money. So if, for example, I said I'll lend you, some kilogram of gold. I don't know how much a kilogram is. A kilogram of gold, maybe grams, maybe 100 grams of gold. Give it back to me in a year as 110 grams. That would be considered. We don't technically invest in gold. We only put money in gold because we are saving it. If there's a fear that the currencies are about to collapse and we'd like to keep our money, some of our money as gold, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, but we are not investing in the gold. We're just trying to protect our money in the gold, just like we would be trying to protect our money if we put it in a checking account or if we took the money and put it under the mattress, okay? So it's just the same. Is investing in Bitcoin halal? That's a complex answer, and I'm going to avoid answering that right now. Is day trading permissible, or trading with intention to sell very soon instead of typical long-term investments? The best type of investments, what Islam is trying to achieve, is productive benefit, where your money is being put to use, people are benefiting, society is benefiting, jobs are being created, good products are being created, good services are being created. So we want to invest in businesses we believe in, businesses that we agree with. I like, for example, I would not like investing in Facebook. I just don't like how they make their money, right? I'm not saying it's haram. Don't get me wrong. I personally don't agree with I don't like how they make their money. They invade a lot of people's privacy. So I would not invest in Facebook. Again, I'm not saying it's haram. So the idea is invest in things you believe in and you like. If you're day trading, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you feel, you wake up in the morning and you see the coronavirus scares and the market went down, 10% or whatever, and you're like, you know what, I wanted to buy this share of Amazon, and I believe Amazon is worth a lot more than what it's going for in the market. I believe it's worth a lot, and it's going for a very, very low price. Yes, you can absolutely buy Amazon in the morning, and if it goes up to that price that you believe it's worth, you can sell it in the afternoon. That's not a problem, because you believed in Amazon, you liked Amazon as a company, you want to be part of that business, you believe it has a certain value, and now you sell it later in the day. Just like if this glass went on sale in the morning for 50 cents, and I know I can sell it in the evening for $1, or I'm not sure if I can sell it in the evening for $1, but I think the price is $1, I'll buy it for 50 cents, it's not a problem. Similarly, if a business I know is low value, good business, halal business, going for sale, why would you not buy it? That's okay. But if you're just looking at technical indicators and the stock price is going up and up and up, and I think people are going to buy it because it's just going up, that's not the way. That's not the way that we buy and sell businesses. So day trading in that type of example would not be permissible. Are we allowed to use the economy going down to our advantage to invest in certain stocks? If your intention is the stock market is down and there are good stocks available, and let me take advantage of people and exploit them, then no, that would not be allowed. But if you're saying, you know what, stocks are on sale, and I feel like these companies are worth more, and eventually they will be worth more, then yes, you can certainly buy stocks because the market is down. That is not an issue. Intention comes into play with everything. Is quick selling of stocks like gambling? Again, it boils down to intention. Treat it like if you're buying and quickly selling, if your intention was, let me buy it, and then I don't really know what this company is, I don't know if it's halal or not, I don't know, it just seems like the stock's going up, let me just buy it and sell it. Yes, that would be a problem. But again, if you're investing in a company that you've done, like when I buy a stock, because I'm a finance major, I do what's called a discounted cash flow analysis. Okay, so I build a big spreadsheet, and then I value it the same way I just like the finance analysts do. I sit down and I calculate the profits that are coming in every year. I project what I believe the projects might be in the future, what the terminal value is. I do the whole calculation, and I say, you know what, this stock should be worth $100, and right now it's selling for 50, and that's where I might buy a stock, right? So if I'm doing it that way, and I say, you know what, I feel like the stock is worth 100, right now it's 50. Even if I buy it for 50 and sell it within 5 minutes for 100, I know what my intention was. There's no problem with that. If I'm just going by, I think it's going up, I'm not really sure, then that becomes more like gambling. So if you, again, it's doing any type of sale where you're doing it consciously and you understand what you're doing, you know what the true value of the product is, and you're not being speculative, right? Then you're not gambling. So basically, it doesn't matter what the product is, the business is, or the commodity is. I need to look into, am I just being speculative? Like, oh, I think it might go up just because I think it might go up because people saying it might go up. Then I'm not really understanding the business. Okay. Which trading platform do I use? I use TD Ameritrade. I don't know if that's relevant. Is refinancing your home possible? Refinancing your home is possible with a musharaka based system. What you would do is you own, let's say, 100% of your house, and you would say, I would like to sell 50% of it to someone else, and then now they own 50%, so you pay them rent on the 50%, and then the other 50% you own. For those in the Iftar class, you're welcome to leave. For anyone else, you're also welcome to leave. Please send any feedback that you have to info@darulilm.co.uk. info@darul-ilm-co- sorry, I can't pronounce. info@darul-ilm.co.uk. You probably registered from that website or sent an email to that website. Jazakallah khair, someone for pasting it. So send any feedback you have over there. Questions. If you have more questions, if you're confused about any concepts, please send them to umer.khan@mail.com. We'll put that up here as well. Everyone has it. Because I don't want you to be confused. If anyone walked away with the message, conventional mortgages and diminishing musharaka are alike, then you walked away with the wrong message. Please don't do that. Diminishing musharaka and conventional mortgages are two very different things. I'm going to end the Q&A in 15 minutes, by the way. Mufti Saab, let me know if that's okay. I'm letting everyone go that wants to go, but I will end Q&A in 15 minutes. Just in case people have questions. I see that people have a lot of questions on this topic. The link for the recording, I believe the link for the recording is the same as the link for the class. So if you come back later, you should be able to access the recording. And it takes WizIQ sometimes up to a day to get the recording ready. So it takes the class and it packages inside an MP4 video streaming format. It takes them a day to do that. So you may have to wait until tomorrow or wait another 24, 36 hours for the recording to be ready. What about purchases with 0%? The interest is really paid by the seller. As I said earlier, so those who are leaving, Jazakumullah khair for attending. May Allah allow you to benefit from the knowledge. Please do send the feedback, and if you have any questions, please send them to me at my email address. For those who are asking questions, okay, can you purchase something on 0% interest, but the seller is really paying the interest? Fahim, the recording should be at the same link. Okay, later, inshallah. Can you buy something on 0%? Yeah, the slides will also be sent out, inshallah. Slides will be sent out. Can you buy something when the seller is paying the interest? I think I addressed this up front. If you're two parties, right? You have Honda Motors. Actually, did I address it? Yeah, I addressed it. I think we're talking about the murabaha situation. If you're two people, and person A sells something to person B, right? And they say, I'm charging you interest, or I'm charging you this extra money. It doesn't matter what they say, as long as the product that you're buying has a fixed price, and that price is fixed and it never changes. So if you registered online, I believe the slides should also be sent out to you. As long as person A is selling something to person B, and that price is known as fixed, and the cost is known and fixed, and over the term of whenever that payment is being made, that amount never changes. There's no late fee, there's no increase amount, there's no decreased amount, and that is considered fine. Because it is just a sale. It is just a sale. Islamically. Conventionally, they call it interest, but We do not call it interest. How do you get the slides and the recording? The recording should be available at the same link, inshallah, and the slides will be emailed out to the email address that you registered with, inshallah. Okay, one question came up. What can you comment on purchasing a house with Ribā in the West? Did the class end? Can't see? Okay. I think the class has ended. Some people, so we will end the class here, inshallah. If you have more questions, please send them to me and my email address, inshallah. Okay? Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.